I hope some more people will show up. Peter is not there, isn't it? Peter Solana. Okay. I don't want to hear about the party. Well, although it's 20 degrees today outside, and some of us had a nice party yesterday, and apparently it was only half of the group. So that's the in crowd. Oh, okay. Well, that's a completely different topic. Okay, let's start. Well, this morning we will talk about SA1, the pilots activity, and we will give you an update, the approach we will take for performing the pilots, and hopefully we will have a fruitful discussion about this approach, whether it's good or not, whether we should adapt it a little bit or not. So, to remind you, the high-level goals for the pilots are these 4 bullets: demonstrate the solutions that are identified and proposed by JRA1 and NA3. So their input is really needed to guide us in our work. We will create proof of concepts, which will involve services for the main infrastructures in Europe, and show to what extent different technologies can be used by the infrastructure service, and that they are compatible and interchangeable. And the main approach is not to build, but reuse existing components. So this will be the program. Well, my introduction just started. Then Niels will get into the pilot environment, the kind of environment we created, how we will do the technical stuff, so we have a nice test bed to perform the pilots on with our communities. Then Mario will elaborate on his task on guest access. He will talk about, for example, the library use case. We also would like to kickstart the e-government ID integration part in AARC. Hopefully we can have a nice discussion of that one as well. And Christos will elaborate a bit on his experience so far in this field. Then there will be a presentation by Niels where he will explain a little bit more about his virtual organization platform as a service project and the kind of components that can be used in the AARC pilots. There are some nice components available there soon, which, well, I think we should certainly test and try and show to the community and see whether they fit with their requirements. Peter Solana will talk about attribute management, and then after the break we will continue with the task 3 by Mikael about access to resources. There are actually 2 topics. One is the integration with commercial services, and the other one is the token translation services, TTS. And Misha and Tom will provide a demo and give a presentation about their experience with CI Logon so far. And there's, I think, really some cool stuff in there. So I'm very curious what you think about that. And then we will finalize with a presentation about ORCID ID, and the role in AARC by Niels again. And then in the end we will have a wrap-up and a planning of the pilots. So when we had to kick off a couple of months ago in Amsterdam, I showed this slide to you, and well, that there will be a lot of interactions between the different activities. And well, actually I experienced a lot of spaghetti and a lot of interactions already. And well, I estimated that, sorry, one back, that we have about, I think, 700 hours of video conferences and calls discussing all. So there should be something tangible right now available to work upon. Well, and with regard to the work done in SA1, we have a milestone document available now on the public AARC website. I'm not sure how many of you have really seen that document. Not that many, I suppose. So have a look, please. And well, like I mentioned yesterday, I recollected that not many people actually explored what's on there on the wiki, because I think all the details you should know are out there. So have a look and go to the private space. And, well, like in all the other activities, all the subtasks are in there in subpages. And this is an example of what we have for the pilot project. So today you will get an overview of what has been done so far, but much more details are in there on these pages with references to Google documents with work plans for these subtasks. So, well, and then there are, of course, results ahead, but the next deliverable will be in month 15, so I don't have sleepless nights about that one right now, but at some time we should start doing some things. Well, then about the approach. I used this picture in the Milestone document because I think this is the way we operate right now. We have the number of communities, the librarians, the humanities, life sciences, high energy physics, and the infra communities. We base our requirements documents and architecture of what we know from the FIM4R paper, from the AAA report. We have had AI workshops. There have been surveys from the different work packages in for example, the GRA1 activity. We have had meetings. Well, and in the end, this work should come available and we can start running SA1 pilots. And I've drawn a cycle over there because I think that's the approach we should take for the components we will test with the communities in the months to come. And hopefully we can feedback our experience back to the other activities, but also feedback and test with user communities. So this is this life cycle. This is how we plan to approach this whole pilot project, and there will be more cycles running. And well, this starts with planning of pilots. Then we have to install, configure, check all the components that are available, and that should be ready for the communities to start to test with. The next step, we get feedback and improvement, improve what we have, maybe tweak a little bit, deliver some of the results to the training package for NA2, feed these results in a pilot evaluation report in the end, and then of course we have to clean up, create manuals for the deployment, and start with the next pilot. And there will of course be some parallel pilots going on, and then the next cycle starts. So, and what we also created was a template or form for the pilot to describe what we are going to do. So I created one example over here. So these are more or less the fields that are in this form, the name of the pilot, who will be involved from the AARC project, but also who will be involved from the community with regard to this particular topic. In this example, the enable federated access to library resources. It will require a description. We should put in the goals there for this pilot, the amount of resources required, and so we really should aim for a commitment from these communities, and that we really start to do these things together, that we have a proper timeline, and let's say after 3 months we should have the results available. So we could move on and go to the next pilot. So I really like to stick to such a template to get this commitment. Yes?
Requirements covered by each pilot. So again, do we need another field stating the requirements from the JRA 1.1 that each pilot covers?
Yes. Well, actually, it's not in my presentation, but when we created the program and had all the topics of the tasks in the rows, we already tried to make the connection to the different requirements, which was in the appendix of the requirements document, to see what part of the requirements is covered by this particular pilot. But you're right, this should be in the form as well, so we can tick mark, well, done. Yeah, good suggestion. Well, we have to establish some, well, call it AARC structure. I was very happy to see the presentation by Marcus, where this first step for creating some structure and architecture came into existence. So I immediately copied the color codes and the kind of topics or components that we should work on. if I remember the discussion well, there was some discussion about level of assurance, whether it fits in the structure that Marcus came up with, and there was something about reputation service. Well, let's park that for now because I'm sure this will be refined in the weeks and months to come. So, and what I tried is to cut the work we have to do in the pilots in chunks. So I understand what we are doing, and maybe you have some better overview of what we are doing as well. So if we take the blue color code about authentication, then we are actually looking at the tasks Mario will take care of. And this has all to do with, well, the kind of authentication routes or entries that we will have available. So everyone, whether you belong to an institution or whether you have not a formal relation to an institution, but if you collaborate within a virtual organization, you can make sure that you will have access to the resources with appropriate level of assurance. So Mario will elaborate on a number of these topics. Well, I don't think we really started with the reputation part because, well, as you know, there's still a lot of discussion about that one, but we have to think about a very minimal way as soon as possible how we can deal with it and just try something. Licia.
I'm doing news. Concerning the reputation, I mean, it was a pity I could not really follow the presentation of Jens, but I think, I mean, maybe we should really think a little bit more what we want to do in terms of reputation. I'm not so sure we should spend so much time in investing really into something
fancy.
Yes, fancy, thank you, about the reputation system, etc. I'm not saying that the component in the architecture should not be there, but maybe we should agree on a high level what such a component should do.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we should focus so much time on the reputation system. I mean, as I said, I could not really understand what Jens was saying, so I couldn't ask him the questions. But
a point I'm trying to make from the very beginning is that we should not spend time for components that are not already out there being used. So I think that the risk in investing time for something that is just a concept and not something tangible is great. And since we just have 24 months ahead of us and we have a really wide area to cover, I don't think we should spend much time. From the J1 point of view, I would like to have a dot or a box in the architecture, trying to pinpoint that this is something that we take into account, but possibly look further into it in ARC 2. And again, I'm saying this with a question mark because I'm not convinced whether even then we will have something tangible to work on.
Yes, I agree. And well, that's why for some topics we have some clues already. And for this one, there are question marks over there. Well, something Marcus mentioned on the Monday triggered me because he said, well, from this Indigo project, we are trying to do the things right. And then the next sentence was, well, there's nothing yet there, or nothing there yet. So that's we have to be careful about it. Well, we are trying to coming up with something that's generic and standardized, but we have to make sure that we don't hit the wall because we want a perfect solution. So if we can do just a little thing about reputation, something really simple, if that's available at all, then we should try it, but not spend too much time in getting the 100% perfect solution there. So, but enough about this topic, authentication. Mario will get into that later on. Then the next one is about external attributes. Well, again, I've really simplified my view on the whole topic. So there is an institutional IDP, or maybe not a kind of IDP, but here it's all about this one, the attribute authority. There might be a need for an aggregation platform. We can think about the flows that Andrea is working on. That could be either push in an assertion or pull via an API. And then, well, we need attribute authorities, of course, and there are some solutions out there which have been compared in the Magic document. And then, of course, we need some resources, servers in the backend that should be able to consume those attributes. Well, this is something Peter will elaborate on before the break as well. Any questions about this one? No? Okay, move on. And then there is, in the architecture, there's something about token translation in a sort of brownish red. And, well, actually, we did some pre-pilot work already with regard to that one. And there the focus is on token translation, but mainly in the context of providing a way to access non-web resources. Well, with these kind of endpoints we would like to access, there's been work done on CI logon, and we will get a nice demo, a cool demo I mentioned already. This could be solved with a solution like Unity. There's been some work done on LDAP facade, well, and there might be some others. But there I'm still awaiting some formal comparison of these components in which we drafted some requirements, and we can, well, make the comparison and see what will fit best and what solution meets our requirements also with regard to security and that kind of stuff and user friendliness. So we really have to make that comparison and make some decisions, because now we are just doing some work, and well, we may obtain some experience from that pre-pilot work, but it should be more than an educated guess, I think, before we commence this pilot work. So I hope that more input will come available from the other activities. Yeah.
Okay. I have my own, yes. So, especially about the token translation, I think that we should surely link this with specific use cases. Now, the thing is that token translation is not something that can be, I mean, it's easy to talk about in an abstract way, but in the end of the day, each of these systems implement a very specific functionality which is tailored for specific use cases, not for all the cases. So first of all, we need to understand whether all the components with the possible solutions we have there, they actually match an existing use case. I mean, we shouldn't try piloting stuff that we don't have a direct use case from the communities for that. This is one thing. And the second thing is that we should, of course, not propose solutions that do not meet also the requirements that you will put there for security, etc., 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 etc. So we must have these two dimensions, I think, use cases and technical requirements.
Yeah, so what we are doing now, well, if, for example, you take CI logon, we have some sort of gut feeling that it could cover a number of requirements for some communities. So that's working in retrospect. But we should do it in a prospective way as well, of course. But I still don't have a view either about what, for example, how you can compare Unity to CI logon, what kind of use case it covers, and whether it fits to one community better than to the other. So yes, we really need this input. Niels?
Yes, one type of token translation service that's not here is actually SAML to OpenID Connect, which is, at least technically speaking, a token translation.
Yeah.
Typically, I think currently not so much in scope for the non-web scenarios as well for a more easy way to integrate in web scenarios. And I was very much triggered by, I think it was Tommy sitting over there next 2 days ago, who said something like, it took my programmer 10 minutes to implement this, and it gave similar functionality.
Yeah.
No, I don't agree,
No,
because
no,
the CI logon is really targeted at doing non-web stuff. Really targeted at doing.
Well, Misha doesn't agree, but
okay. Clearly, maybe we should not have the discussion here, but clearly it's on. It should be. That was actually my point. Should it be on the agenda? And I think there's sort of a buzz that it probably should.
This discussion will come back later. But I had the same question, and we have to decide whether it's well, the OpenID Connect to SAML thingy, whether it should, well, in some circumstances, in some contexts, it would better fit in the guest ID part, maybe in the task, and some others might better fit within this task. So we have to decide on it, and don't shift the hot potato.
Well, it's better than cold potatoes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and then there's also in the task from Mikael work to be done on connecting commercial service providers. Well, there's still we have some questions about how to scope this pilot, where to start with the identification of suitable providers. Well, that could be Helix Nebula, for example, but also the GN Cloud catalog. So we have some clues there, but there's still a discussion going on about, well, should we focus on the smaller local ones? And then my colleague Andres, who is doing work in a European context, well, responded well. He had a different opinion. He had better experience with the bigger players in the market, even in the United States. So, well, let's find out what would be the best approach. Well, and in the requirements document, there have been some problems discovered with regard to the onboarding of commercial service providers, and Mika will get into that one later as well. So, like I mentioned, our work started already, but we need to be guided by the work in other activities. So I'm very happy that this requirements document, which is really a good document, I think, is available. The blueprint architectures, well, before this meeting I wasn't aware of the existence of the nice colored architecture slide deck, but things are going on there as well. That's good. Keep on going. And well, I will keep this one for later on. Let's start with the task-specific presentations. So Mario, if you can start. You do it from your laptop?
Yes.
Okay.
No, otherwise is there a USB key?
Well, I can.
Sorry.
I have it here as well. Want to use this mic?
Okay. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Try my best to give you an overview of what we have thought for piloting on guest identities. And so essentially today I'll shortly remind you the goals of our task, which is implement pilots on supporting guest identities according to the recommended solution by Jerry 103, as was already mentioned by Paul. And of course, prove the feasibility of what we do involving end users. I think this is known. The project objectives on the guest identities, of course, are to lower the entrance barrier for organizations to adopt Federated AI, providing them with solution to get their IDP when they don't have it, and have it federated possibly, make use of guest IDPs or bridge towards non-federated IDs like social and e-government. It's a bright topic, sort of. So we also want to, of course, identify the relevant use cases within selected user communities for applying solution and prove their effectiveness. So it's so I'm trying to make a sort of a funny slide about that to make the topic a bit more enjoyable. So essentially, I feel home means in our context, I have an ID from my home organization IDP, registered in my national identity federation, and my DP is a member of Edugain. There I feel home, and we are sort of on the safe side. But guests are knocking at our door, so there's someone coming to us saying, well, I asked, but in my university there's no identity provider. Can you anyhow help me accessing this file sender, which is provided by NRAN, as is asking me for federated credentials? Then we have other guests. Well, in my country, there's nothing such a national identity federation. Can I use a sort of a free identity federation, a trial license for it, or for my IDP to plug it somewhere? Or can you help my country getting an ID federation quickly? And another kind of guest knocking is a librarian. Can I please get rid of IP-based authentication? It has a lot of drawbacks. And for my users, and adopt federated AAI for authenticating them. So also I have a Facebook account. Can I use it to access these wiki pages provided by as federated SP in Edugain? So it's a very wide topic to address, and I try to use a color code to help. So we can, as strategists, we identified essentially these 3 subtasks within this task. So bridging towards existing social or governmental IDs. So this is the so-called long tail of science of users. And subtask 1, we try to integrate existing social IDs with attributes for accessing federated service providers. Then, of course, we can enroll new IDs or spawn new IDPs, or spawning new identity federation where they're missing. And then, of course, we need to support home organization to get their IDP, providing their IDP or providing their IDs, or provide guest IDPs. And of course, we can also try to facilitate the setup of all required services and practices to implement in a national identity federation. Then there's another subtask, which is devoted to libraries for the special role they play in our project. And the strategy, of course, is the push for the adoption of federated AI in the community of the libraries, and this means getting rid of IP-based authentication wherever possible. So support libraries in the adoption of federated AI through an SSO proxy, and also integrate national organization managing contracts with publishers at the national level when these exist. So essentially what I will try to cover today, it's as I already mentioned, we identified these 3 subtasks: long tail of science, guest IDP, and library pilot. I will not be exhaustive this morning, with Christos we will present 5 pilots in 3 domains. Honestly, I've been digging and working more on the library pilot with Lala and the others, so that's the one I will present in more detail. Christos will present another option for a library pilot, which is of interest for some nations or some cases like GRNet, and he will report about it later on. Okay, Christos will also report about what he sees as a bridging towards the governmental IDs. Is a topic I did not enter so far. So, okay, I will also try with a couple of slides to summarize the ongoing discussions on other topics which fit in the task. So, bridging towards social IDs and catch-all federation, which are more or less ongoing discussion so far. Okay, so essentially coming to the pilots, we proposed 5 pilots. One is the hybrid authentication. I call it SSO proxy, which is providing a way for libraries to read whatever possible of IP-based authentication, which has a lot of drawbacks, and giving them the option to use a federated identity whenever possible. Then we have a sort of initial ideas on something which could be useful for our project, which would be extending JASP as an SP towards the Edugain IDPs. So it's an initial idea. It's not a detailed description of a pilot, but I'll mention what we thought about it. As I said, Crystal will report about the HEAL-Link and the pilot they are thinking about for the libraries in a different perspective. From a different perspective, it's more proxying a whole set of IDPs and organizations instead of proxying the individual library at the individual library level. And then, okay, the cloud IDP to try and make it more adoptable and general as possible for others to provide it to their users. And again, Christos will report about what he has envisaged for e-government. So, coming to the hybrid library pilot, there's a set of partners which will contribute: the DASI, GAR, Liber, the Moravian Library. Okay, I'll try to go quickly to this because I think it's known to everyone. So libraries are guest users by definition, being used to IP-based authentication. They are familiar with this approach, so publisher relying on IP-based authentication. And we need to move away from that approach, which has many drawbacks. And that's why we're targeting this community in a sort of special way. Now, there's of course federated SPs in this domain, publishers which have made their services available in a federated fashion. So libraries in the next year will have to live in a hybrid situation. They will have to live in a situation in which some publishers will be accessed through federated credentials, and some publisher will still rely on IP-based authentication. So they will have to deal with the two approaches for a while. And we thought about trying to ease their life in these years in which they will have to deal with both approaches. So it is of course demanding in terms of tools to be integrated in a unique functional environment. That's why we need to pilot and see what we can do in helping libraries to cope with this situation. So, okay, essentially we are one-to-one referring to a paper. Yeah, of course, yes.
To live in the hybrid model, that actually suggests that libraries will have SAML-based authentication at all, that they will have an IDP, basically, to use.
Fair enough, yes.
Is that really the case? Will that happen? I mean, in the Netherlands, for some that may actually be true, but for others that may actually not be true. So.
Yeah, but can I ask you another question? What is our preferred option in this context?
Oh, no doubt about that. Yes, but actually, I'm thinking. No, I don't know what I'm thinking.
Okay, Peter.
Well, share it then.
Well, I think we should develop technology that can be used by a single library or that can be used by all libraries that don't have an IDP. And I think that's what you're heading to. And I think that this is very doable. In a pilot, we can, I think what we need, and is a shibboleth IDP with a login handler that can handle IP-based authentication and non-IP-based authentication. Matter of fact, we already wrote such a thing, and this could be used for a single library, and it is used by a single library right now. But I think Niels heads at the poor libraries that won't be able to operate an own IDP, and then there will be a single IDP for a number of poor libraries, and maybe that would be a very good pilot to head to.
Okay.
But I think this model can easily become as a service, right? I mean, you can use this model to provide it as a service to libraries.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
so I mean, nothing changes technically, so it's fine.
Exactly,
But-
it's the same technology.
We do have the IDP in the cloud that you can offer to them. They can be operated, for instance, by somebody in the country for the libraries, so they don't have to do that themselves. I mean, GAR has tested that in Italy with a couple of libraries already, but also in the past with cultural centers and
Yeah, I agree. I agree that it is technically very feasible, and I think GAR has completely shown that you can do that really. But there's also a business case scenario there. And I, for example, for sure know that SurfNet is actually not really interested in running IDP in the cloud. Our mantra is sort of find any commercial provider to do that for you. So although the technical solution is just brilliant and perfect, no doubt about that, I think we will never run that. I think. I'm just...
Yeah, but that... Yeah, that's needed anyway, but discussion started already, and I think there are some slides that can support this discussion. But one thing that might be important, I figured it out more often, is that, well, we all have our national point of departure, and which may be different from one country to another. And, well, in Italy, apparently there are libraries that needs such a solution. But then we have to make sure that there are other countries that need it as well. So there is a generalized need. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'll try to stick to my slot of time because I tend to extend it. So
we will skip Niels' presentation.
No, but it's we inspired our ideas from a paper which is called Espresso Study, which is an ISO paper of a few years ago. But essentially, there they model they modeled the actual use cases for libraries. It's as I said, a couple of years ago, some years ago, but still applies to the situation libraries are in, at least in Europe. Essentially, libraries provide an institutional main page, and then from there you log in, and then you access protected pages after authentication, and they, as a reference model, as I say, from legacy tradition, they use IP-based authentication, meaning that if you have an IP from the campus or a VPN providing you with such an IP, you can access resources after or through a proxy, an IP proxy, after authentication. So this is a requirement from the provider side. You need to authenticate anyhow. As an example, in that paper, they report they show the Brown University Library. Normally, this is the situation which a user is faced to through the web. He can browse for the ESPs, so the journals which have been subscribed by the library, and then decides which one is interested in. There's search tools for, of course, trying to access and find full text documents. And essentially, we from this study, in this study they modeled the interaction of course of users through the main institution page, and as I said, from normally in the institutional page of the library, there's a set of resources listed. And once you drift from the IP-based model through the web, to the SAM architecture, you would have, of course, an IDP, and from the IDP, of course, you'll select. You go through IDP and get the credentials which will entitle you to access the papers. Okay, in the paper they described five use cases. We focus here on a couple of them. One is library user accessing federated and non-federated resources through the library institutional page. So a user which is going through the main page of the library, essentially he browsed for resources, and he will actually see listed federated and non-federated journals or resources. In this context, an SSO proxy is required, and federated sources must be listed using a discovery service free syntax, whereas, of course, non-federated resources must have a proxy syntax. And what we see as required, what they see as required, is as an SSO proxy for dealing with such an hybrid environment. Note that in this process, the discovery service never shows up. In a sense, it's not needed. You are on the institutional page of the library. And also, if the user is going to the main page, if he has already an SSO session established to the SP, of course, also the login page won't be shown to the user. So another use case is a user willing to access resources after a search. They don't go through the main page of the library. They do a search. They get a list of digital object identifier or of URLs, and they got this list, but they don't know a priori if the DOI will be accessible for them. So they don't know whether the library has subscribed for that resources for him or not. So essentially, here we need an institutional link resolver, which somehow translates the URL into the deep link, which will entitle the user to access the resources and will tell the provider who is the user and where he's accessing from. Essentially, again, in that case, the institutional login page is not shown if there is already an SSO session between the user and browser and the SP. In this case, we need, as I said before, an access mode switch. Essentially, it's the functional component. So something which switches from the SAM word to the IP-based word according to the resources which is accessed. The important thing is that experience for the user should be sort of transparent. Okay, so we are listing here the requirements we are addressing from the requirement document, and the red ones are the one we are addressing with this pilot. I'll just mention them. So we want to, with the pilot, we want to cover all the two scenarios, IP-based and federated authentication. We would like to take into account the walk-in users, so users which come to the library, they're physically on premises, and they need to access a resource. In some cases, they should be entitled to access resources, given the fact that they are inside the library. And of course, there's all the benefit of getting rid of IP-based authentication. I'll go quickly through this. So we want to provide users with smooth, seamless access to resources, take into account walk-in users, and provide users with access, of course, when they are outside the campus network. So getting rid of the drawbacks of IP-based authentication. We would like to have the resource discovery, the SP resource discovery, integrated in this process. So making sure that a user experiences sort of smooth access to resources. This is how such a pilot could look like in terms of possible architecture or draft architecture, how do you want to call it. Essentially, we would have a sort of a double authentication, and so we have a double fork in the IDP layer and a double fork at the SP level. A library, as Niels was suggesting, is supposed to have an IDP, or we will provide them with one IDP. And the identity management tool to the right is supposed to be integrated in the library IDP. And there is also a physical terminal, computer, so a workstation for walk-in users. And there we could, for example, use the DASI provided IP-based authentication shibboleth extension. And then, of course, the proxy the pilot will focus on the central box there, where you have, as I said, components which are acting as access mode switch and will emulate the pilot library institutional portal. And these tools are tools like Easy Proxy, Primo Summons, SFX, or Han. And to cope with both use cases, so you go through the institutional link resolver, you get the deep link, and you go through the SSO proxy to access federated resources top left, whereas you use an IP proxy to use to access the non-sum resource. Okay, I think I said this already into some more detail. The functional component is an access mode switch, and as I said before, two ways are available from that SSO proxy. So
Mario, can we go back to the previous slide?
You tell me how much time I have left, right?
Yeah, not so much anymore, unfortunately.
That's what I meant. Again?
Yes, I'm just wondering if there are some comments from the audience about this approach, whether this is doable, whether there are any drawbacks. And we, of course, have to do a sort of sanity check with the library community if this is what they want. And some of them already have experience with, for example, Easy Proxy. Any comments? Niels?
I think in the Netherlands this approach would be tricky. Well, the way the arrows are is tricky. Because in the Netherlands a walk-in library user could never ever be a member of the library IDP if the library IDP is actually a member of the federation. Because federation policy, we can only have natural persons in the federation. So that doesn't actually mean that this could not work, but it does mean that the arrow from the walk-in user to the IDP library cannot exist, and that it should be straight up into the SSO proxy scenario.
I think that's what I meant somehow.
Okay.
This is sorry, it's a good remark. So it doesn't mean that the walk-in user has to be registered in the IDP, of course.
Yeah, and as soon as you have that, then actually the walk-in user solution could easily be a national solution or something like that. You only would need one.
A sort of a dotted line for the IP-based part. And
okay.
Maybe that is missing.
Very subtle.
Okay. Let's move on.
Thank you. I also think that you could use the IP proxy for the federated resource as well. So if the login handler just says, okay, entitlement walk-in user because of IP proxy, but it still talks XAML to the resource, that is also possible. So another arrow from IP proxy to resource one could also be possible.
Okay. Well. Okay, so the objectives and results we expect from this setup is, as I say, test the tools with hands-on effort and contribution from libraries. We have to carefully evaluate the different solution for the access mode switch, and there's a variety of tools we are not totally aware a priori now of all the details and all the integration work which will have to be carried out. But so far, if I get it right, Ca' Foscari University of Salento in Italy, the Königliche Bibliothek, and the Moravian Library are willing to contribute, and this is good news. Okay, this is a wrap-up of the outcome, but I think it's clear. So getting rid of IP-based authentication implies a lot of benefits for this community. Now, another pilot we would like to bootstrap is trying and propose the extension of JASP outside the UK. Now, of course, we need to discuss with them, but JASP is a very nice service provided in the UK. In the UK Federation is offering centralized access to journal user statistics data. Well, it is currently limited to the UK libraries. In our view of the SSO proxy, this could be a nice integration to the SSO proxy, and in such a way that with some components which might be required from JASP on that architecture, we could also fetch the data from for both, let's say, IP-based providers and SSO access providers. JASP collects the data coming from IDPs, elaborates them, and publish them in a friendly way for the libraries. Again, we need to talk with the UK Federation about this and see whether this is possible. I think JISC is providing this, so we will have to talk to them. Yeah, I know. We need to talk. Yeah, the guy with the blue shirt in the first row. Anyhow, the benefits for the AARC community would be very, very evident. So if we could offer this through EduGain, of course it will be a boost for libraries to get federated somehow. And I don't know if Stephen, you have anything to say, or?
No, because I didn't know that JUSP existed, so
okay.
That's not my domain of work. But
no.
What I can do is I can go and ask, see whether we can get that possibly extended to EduGain.
Okay. I think Lala had some preliminary contact with. Okay, the Cloud IDP pilot quickly. It's I think it's known. It's a development we have at GAR for mostly institutions, which are research hospitals, and we have a sort of bunch of IDPs run on our cloud infrastructure. I think it's 24 or 25. We provide them with the IDP. Andrea and Marco are our experts on the topic, and they have an automated fashion through Puppet to install and configure the IDP. The customers are happy with that, I would say. So for us, given the fact that we have nice feedback in Italy from this approach, we are not offering the service to others, of course, at the European level, the European scale, but we would like to see whether there's room in AARC to extend this model so that others could do this job for their customers or their home organizations within their federations. So the idea would be to have a pilot on this, is providing deployment suites, support material, which is already there in a relevant quantity, and then of course test the automatic deployment procedure and include branding, of course, for other institutions to make use of this. Okay, a couple of slides in which I tried from my pilot, I would say low profile perspective to summarize what I understood from the ongoing discussion on JRA1 on the other topics which we need to cover. Jens sent a sort of a wrap-up email yesterday saying reputation, what it could look like, and in an email he was also mentioning, well, maybe we'll see whether this is option. The idea, I think, Jens started from, I had a couple of Skype discussion with him, was to have something, let's say, quick and dirty to prototype how managing reputation could look like. But of course, have a sort of a simple SAM PHP SP, some account management, and support for this extra attribute. But I will stop here about that. And last point, I hope I'm not too late, is there is an ongoing discussion, I think also in Edugain, whether to have a catch-all federation. I think some discussion started about the grid IDP pool, which used by some European projects. I am not into the details of this, but I have a few questions for the audience, which are, I didn't quite get if this is of general interest for the community. So maybe it's not a question I should ask, but nevertheless, do you think this is useful to support the spawning of identity federations in other countries, especially where there's nothing? And do you think that somehow letting them playing as of course as IDP mostly with federations could at some point help them to start their own federation for the benefit of the researchers, I would say worldwide in the communities. Yeah, so I'm not into the Edugain technical aspects, but what kind of IDP catch-all federation policies should be enforced, expected? Could this be a temporary solution we provide to someone for some limited amount of time, saying, guys, you had 2 years, either you spawn your federation now or you're out? I don't know.
I think what you should do is talk to Marina, I can't pronounce her last name. She's the task lead for Federation as a Service in the Géant project, and they're dealing with exactly these kinds of things. And I don't think they have actually, no, I don't know. It could actually be that they have the intention of looking into IDP as a service. They're definitely doing Federation as a service for new countries and stuff like that. So, and in principle, I think IDP in the cloud is a very good scenario. Catch-all federation, yeah, there are some legal issues with that, I guess.
Yeah, I understand, of course. But the question for me would be if this is beneficial for our community as well or not. I don't know. If it's
I think this should be contemplated in any way. I mean, it's clearly a policy and legal question, not a technical one, really. So,
policy, it's also how you then operate and sustain the catch-all federation, who is willing to run that. And it's very much an open question.
I mean, let's say if it's beneficial for everyone, who runs that could get a sort of whatever kind of contribution from the community to run that service. If that, no, I mean, I'm not an expert at all. So,
general services that appear as generally useful suffer from kind of a tragedy of the commons. And in the end, everyone wants to use the service, nobody wants to pay, and then it dies. That's what you often see, unfortunately.
But I don't think it is. Typically, what, for example, the VO platform as a service activity in Géant does is make sure that there is a business case to sustain something. So this doesn't, I mean, the fact that somebody's going to run the service doesn't mean it's going to be run for free, for example. Sorry. Yes, clearly. The one comment is I may have already solved your other scenario with JUSP. JUSP is in Edugain already as an SP. So on one hand that's helpful because it actually means that we can sort of forget about Stephen from day one. Sorry. Well, the French, no, that is, I find that hard to believe because in their wave I see French IDPs, I see Italian IDPs, I see Acronet. So there are many, many IDPs there. So either they're bluntly publishing whatever they can get their hands on. Yes. Well, maybe it's not a JASP service I'm looking at, but
So maybe we can check that later. Yeah. Any other questions with regard to this task?
Should I present the pilots are going with VOPass, so I don't know, what's your plan?
Well, there are some components in VOPass that can be used. So Niels will give a brief explanation about what could be available and useful in this context. So we can have a look at it now and
then continue with the pilots for libraries and eGov again afterwards.
Could be.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I just want to make one comment though from Mario's presentation, and possibly this is a mistake from the JR1.1 perspective. Nothing changes from the pilots you mentioned, but one of the requirements was that basically most of the publishers do not support federated access. It was the first one, and actually it was written in the deliverable, but it was written as a report from a discussion we had about the Netherlands use case. So this is something that we need to verify, whether the problem is actually in the provider side or in the library space. The problem is there, but I'm just saying this because it was stated that it's a problem of the publishers, which I'm not 100% sure that this is the case. But this changes nothing regarding your pilots.
Yeah, there are many providers that do support SAML already, but as long as there are still many that don't, we have a hybrid situation. Yeah. Thank you, Mario. Okay. Yeah.
So, but is there a use case to transfer my slides? I don't know.
Or you can mail it to me now. I will. 'Yes. You send it to me? Yes. Okay, yeah. One minute. Yeah.
Okay, so I will try to be brief because I understand that we do not have too much time. So basically, I would like to discuss the idea of two pilots, one in the library space and one regarding bridging eGov EIDs to our infrastructure and federations. So I will start with eGov part first, because that's what I put first in my slides. Sorry for that. I should have started with the library case. But anyway, the idea is, I don't know how many of you are familiar. I mean, I presented something similar during the kickoff meeting in Amsterdam. So on the left hand, you have EduGain, or something that looks like EduGain, with the federations, with the various different models for federations, hub and spoke, full mesh federations, mix of these things. And on the right side, you have basically what is depicted from the Stork architecture, which more or less is what EIDAS is going towards, or starts implementing. So in the eGov world, basically the idea is that each member state has one so-called proxy service that acts as the gateway between that country and the other countries. And there's a cycle of trust between these proxy services in order to route information from country to country. So the interesting bit here is that Stork and the EIDAS proxy model does not really care about what happens internally within the country. It has, of course, some guidelines and some requirements for the security aspects of the EID systems, but technology-wise, it doesn't care. I mean, you can have whatever you want. But it implements a very specific protocol for the exchange of authentication and attribute information across borders. And the protocol that they use is, of course, based on SAML, but they have sufficiently extended it so that it's not compatible with what we're doing.
Basically playing Microsoft.
More or less. So the use case that we are looking into there are two use cases there. One use case, which I think is the most obvious one, is you have a service provider sitting somewhere in one of the federations. It could be any science portal, it could be something else, and wants basically to authenticate users using their eGov IDs. Simple as that. The second use case, which I'm not sure whether it makes sense for AARC, at least right now, is to do the other way around. Also in the eGov space, you have service providers implementing the sufficiently different software stack of Stork and EIDAS, and they would really like to use service attributes to get attributes from the academic world, from the institutions. So, but I'm not really sure whether the second one is something that we should really be looking into in AARC 1. Perhaps it's more something for AARC 2, but we can discuss about it. So, for the first scenario, the idea is that a user visits an EduGain-enabled service somewhere in Greece, for example. The service provider redirects the user to the discovery service, where actually the user finds another option from the set of options that he already has or she already have to log in using her eGov ID or Stork. I don't know how we brand it. Then a new flow is being started. Actually, the discovery service sends the user to this proxy element, which we call EduPeps, which on the one side behaves like a standard IDP proxy within our world, and on the other side it is able to talk the Stork SAML protocol. So the user goes there, hits the EduPeps proxy, then there the user is able to select the country of origin. Now being in the Stork side in the EIDAS world, the user is redirected to the proxy service of that country, authenticates using her eGov ID, and then gets back to the proxy element. A small translation takes place of the attributes and gets back to the SP. Now, this might sound very trivial, but it is not so trivial, because there are many aspects that somebody should note here. First of all, the topology that Stork has and the topology of the EduGain world is completely different. So this component there must be able to understand also how to route things across these two topologies. The second issue is the harmonization of attributes. The harmonization of attributes. So from the EIDAS world, you get a specific, very rich set of attributes, potentially, and somehow you need to map this to the attributes that we are using within our world, which is, of course, a very, very limited subset of what they have defined. But again, you need to do this translation. And apart from all this, you have also the very different user experience. So they have a very specific user experience in the EIDAS world of how the user should make the selection of the country and follow the flow within the EIDAS world, while you have a separate solution in our world. So if you mix these two things together, it creates a very explosive combination for the user, which basically the user does not understand what's happening. So this is something that we will not implement in ARC. This is something that we have already implemented in GN3 Plus and GN4. So this is something that I have seen it work in a very closed environment. But I would like to also bring it also in SO1 to pilot it in a wider environment and try to understand and get the feedback from the people whether something like this makes sense and try to understand how we should move in the future in this space. Licia.
I thought that Stork was dead. No, and then the other question is, if he's alive, what's the relation between Stork and EIDAS?
Very good question. So Stork is dead, the Stork project. The Stork idea is there and will be there. So from the very beginning, Stork was supposed to be a project that defined a protocol, an architecture, and did an original implementation. So this has happened, and at the end of the Stork 2 project, they were supposed to deliver everything and pass it along to CEF, which is the Computing Connecting European Facility, something like this, which is basically the branch of the EC that handles the member states' IT central infrastructure, more or less. So this has been done. They have taken over everything that Stork has produced, and now they are the ones that are implementing and pushing the EIDAS model. So the EIDAS model basically does not name Stork, does not say you have to use Stork, but it says that you have to use the same architecture, the same ideas that Stork has. So to my knowledge, right now as we speak, this group of people in CEF, they are doing a new implementation of the proxy component that's going to be in production early this summer of 2016. And all the member states are supposed to upgrade to this new proxy model. The interesting bit here is that almost all the member states already have a proxy in place using what was produced from Stork 1. And in summer 2016, they will have to upgrade with what will come out from this EIDAS activity. Of course, each member state is allowed to produce their own implementation that is compatible with the EIDAS architecture. So they say, if you have something that can behave like what we call a proxy, we are happy to use that.
So, but then can this be expanded to be the more general use case is that basically you want to enable users with an EID in general.
Exactly. So let me come back to this because this is a very important question. Already in the eGov space, there is some activity reaching out to universities, asking them to pilot the Stork service provider implementation in order to bring them on board to this kind of infrastructure. So already there's people going out and saying to universities, look, you can implement an extra software stack and you can connect to the Stork/EIDAS infrastructure. I don't know what it's going to be the name in the end of the day. Now, we thought about this pilot, this concept, in a way to keep what we have today and actually interface the eGov infrastructure at a higher level than the actual service providers, so that the service providers do not have to implement yet another software stack. So this is the idea. So in general, if you want to interact with the eGov space, either you implement the software stack at the SP side, or you do something like this as a central solution. I know that already some people have done some testing with implementing dual software stack. So I know that Roberto Barbera has already done a pilot to integrate the SP Stork SAML library to the Science Gateway that he's implementing. Yes, exactly. So this is the one option, and this is the other option. And of course, we need to understand whether this is feasible. I mean, technically, it is feasible, but does it make sense to have this operationally? I cannot answer this question. So this is what I want to pilot, just in order to get a feeling, to see how it looks like, and actually get also your ideas and your contribution, your feedback, in order to see whether it makes sense to pursue something like this in ARC2 or not.
Well, I personally feel this is a very good approach. The only thing for the pilot that interests me is where do you actually get your government login? Because
what do you mean?
How would you log? How would you do the actual authentication?
The actual authentication.
Yes.
First of all, Stork does not really care about this. I try to make the.
Yeah, but
but how it will happen in the pilot? You mean?
Yes.
So right now, in most of the member states, they have a dual infrastructure, the production so-called infrastructure, which runs and nobody uses, and they have also the pre-production infrastructure, which is used for testing and for putting new services on board. So surely at GRNet we have a good connection with our ministry, so we can use the pre-production infrastructure of Greece to test this out. But I have very good connection also with the Spanish ministry to also try to do some tests there, and perhaps with Italy also, because I remember that we had a discussion with Lala. I don't know if we can do something also with Italy.
Yeah, well, the challenge here is that.
We try to have some collaboration with the Polytechnic of Torino that run the PEPs in Italy, but we don't get many.
So something interesting is that, for example, if you ask to give you the code base to just run it, you cannot get it. So you cannot get basically the PEPs implementation that Stork has done and the IDAS have. So you have to rely on something that somebody runs somewhere. It's tough, but this is the world we need to play in. And I should also point out that Mikhail also has done some interesting work in Czech Republic around this. So we can also work on this pilot if you are interested. Okay, so for the sake of time, should I proceed with?
Yes, because Peter has to present about the attribute management as well.
So I will be very fast for the next pilot. So I skip the second scenario, which is more complicated. Basically, the idea here is that somebody from a Stork service logs in using eGov.ID and receives attributes from an edugain attribute authority, but let's skip it for now. I think perhaps this is...
I'm sorry to take time, but just to understand, can we just make a decision here, or at least or put that as an action for decision, whether we park this second proposal for now or not? This more complex one, that to use this edugain attribute authority for Stork, or I mean, shall we have an action to discuss further what to do with this at least?
Yes, well, I think we need an offline discussion and define the number of steps we will undertake. Yeah.
Personally, I would just go for one, but we can discuss it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
Yes. Yes, and this. True. Basically, this looks into the attribute authorities within edugain. So perhaps if we have time to do it in the attribute authority task of S1, perhaps it could be a possibility. So, and now going to, and I had also used Marcus' slides to showcase that basically the eGov pilot that we're describing uses the eGov.ID component there, the proxy component that was depicted in Marcus' slides, and the SAML SP and the other SP, which basically is the SAML Stork SP I was talking about. So going now to the library pilot. Now this is a different twist of what Mario presented. So in Greece, we have an interesting use case, and I think this is also common in other countries. Libraries in Greece usually do not manage the actual contracts with the publishers. So libraries in Greece actually, in the flow that we have described for federated access, they do not participate in any way. So more or less, libraries are the entry points of users in the universities, but they do not run IDPs, they do not run SPs, they don't do anything like this. But we have the consortium of libraries in Greece, which is the actual entity that manages the contracts on their behalf, and which is actually the entity which also manages some central services for all the libraries in order to ease the access of the users to the publishers. So what we have come up with is basically a pilot that actually such a consortium joins the federation as an actual service provider. So from having a passive role in the whole federated access ecosystem, it suddenly becomes an active element, being a service provider, and basically using this IDP SP proxy model, the library consortium is able to provide an entry point for the publishers to the users of the libraries, and a central point in which the library consortium can implement its policies, can manage its contracts, and the access to the publishers. So something that drove the initial idea was the requirement from their side to retain branding and control on the product they deliver to their customers. This has nothing to do with the branding we talk about in EduGain or about the federated access branding. It's about the branding of a provider of a service towards its customers. So using the federated access model that we have right now at GRNet, basically the library consortium is not visible at all to the end user, to the customer. And this was a problem. And actually this problem led them to do what it's not a very nice graph, what I tried to show in the left side. Basically what we have right now at GRNet, at Greece, is we have two federations. We have one federation, which is the Greek National Federation, which has all the service providers in Greece and all the identity providers, and another federation, which is the Healing Federation, the Federation of the Library Consortium, which has the same IDPs, plus the service for the publishers as service providers. And the reason they did this was in order to retain the branding towards the customers, because having their branding visible, it made sense for them in order to also to retain the funding and make it visible to the funding bodies of the service they provided. So with this pilot, what we want to do is basically investigate the solution of, as I said, of having the library consortium joining the federation in a proper way as a service provider and hiding the complexity of the management of publishers behind an SPIDP proxy model. This element, this SPIDP proxy, is something that will be managed by GRNet and will be offered to them as a service. And on top of that, they can build their own service portfolio for their customers within the library space. So some of the benefits that basically we see with this pilot, it's first of all the retainment of branding, the fact that you can manage contracts that either are completely centrally managed in an opaque way, the publishers do not see the actual libraries, or in a way that you release also information about the home organization that the user is coming from using a semi-transparent model for the proxy. The technical infrastructure is managed centrally by the consortium and the high-level services, and this is something that actually eases the burden that the libraries have to do in order to retain access for the users. And the consortium can then also hook up even more services in order to make their product even more viable. So basically, this pilot is, from the library consortium point of view, is built in a way in order to make it possible for them to create a product that is interesting for their customers and can give more possibilities using the federated access mechanism we have right now today. The potential benefits for AARC, of course, is one, it's the clear thing that we experience with variations of the SP proxy model and try to see how this fits with the in the library space in terms also of contract management. And of course, I'm sure that servants there can also put lots of input. And also, it's a potential model that can be used by other library consortia. We are right now in contact also with library consortia in the States, in other countries in Southern Europe, and we see that more or less many of them would like to have such an offering in their portfolio. And finally, we'd like also to use this activity in order to prepare some guidelines of how to establish contracts with publishers. Because what we are seeing right now, it's that basically having federated access in order to access publisher content is not a technical problem, but more it's a problem of having the right contract in place so that will give you the possibility to have this access. So, regarding this pilot, basically the elements we are going to use, it's the national federations and EduGain, of course GIANET in this pilot, but whoever else wants to test this also, the proxy element we have in this picture, and the SAM LSP. And this is all I had to say.
Great, thank you.
One question. I'm assuming that some of the SPs are actually already in EduGain themselves, also, because they would be the Springers and the Elseviers of this world, or is this not correct?
This is a very good point. Now, if I was to rewrite basically the requirement in JRE1, I wouldn't say that many publishers do not have federated access support. I would say many publishers are not part of EduGain. So the case is that many publishers do support SAML, but they are not part of EduGain. And this is a reality. So what we have noticed, and basically the info I have from the library consortium in Greece, is that there is a tendency from the publisher side not to use the discovery service and everything we have in EduGain and just use their own stuff and directly send the people to the identity providers, hiding everything that we are doing. And this is happening right now. So using this approach, basically we want to bring in, again, some elements in the picture. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. The only comment I would like to make is, well, I'm just wondering whether there are library consortiums in other countries that, well, would like to have something like this as well, so we can extrapolate it. Yes, you want to say something about it?
Well, I think of the Spanish one, Review. We have a federated access also in some regions, like in Madrid area. And today starts a meeting, so I could send some messages to them. And I have a real contact there today. They have a meeting. So perfect. Maybe it could work.
Real time.
Sounds good.
Great. Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you, Christos. Thank you all. Then, Peter, we go on with your presentation.
Okay, so I put together some slides about the task SA 1.2, which is, as Paul introduced at the beginning of the morning, the attribute management pilot task. So, well, just an overview of the topics of this presentation. I will give first an introduction of the task, brief introduction of the task, then I will focus on the work done so far, so what I have to report about attribute management, some experience we have, and some issues that have been raised by testing this integration, and then the last part is, of course, about the next steps, the timeline and the plans. So what are the goals of the task? So is to pilot attribute management services and their integration with existing services. So third-party sources of information for VO membership, for example, of the users, group management within the VO, role management within the VO, so to define the capabilities of the users, but not only for VO management, of course. Attributes, third-party attributes can be used to extend the attributes provided by the IDPs of the user IDPs to work on the level of assurance, adding information about the level of assurance of the IDP, etc. And what basically we are focusing in this task is the third-party thing. So adding, in a scenario where there is a service provider and an identity provider, adding another service, which is the attribute authority, which is managed separately from the IDPs. In this scenario, so let altogether IDP and attribute authority put together the information that are needed by the service provider. So the goals, the outcomes, let's call it, of this task is to test this solution. So to test how technically feasible is to integrate third-party attribute authorities with the services that users need to access. So how we can make services consume the attributes. How the workflows should work to query the attributes from the service provider, the attributes from the attribute authorities to the service providers, which type of aggregation services, how we can aggregate attributes coming from different sources. So one example is IDP and attribute authorities, but it's not actually. I think there are several use cases to have even more than one attribute authority to get additional attributes from. And this is pretty much what we have done in this so far, but I think that is also, since we will pilot these services, we'll put them in production, we will have instances there for the users. It's also we also need to test in practice how these services are actually fulfilling the use cases of the users. So how good they are for group management in this type of community or for another community. Of course, this is something that needs to be done in collaboration with the JR1, with the user stories, with the requirements that we gathered so far. So, of course, this second part is probably more, will need more a strict collaboration between JRA1 and 1.4, which is the attribute authority, and SE 1.2. So here I added this in this slide, the contributors to SE 1.2. There may be actually more than this. This is the partners who answered basically when I asked, what would you like to do within SE 1.2? So this is more than to show the partners involved, is also to show what are the possible topics and services that could be used. So EJ.U is the task leader, and in particular, our interest is to integrate the attribute management, third-party attribute management with, let's say, with services, resource provisioning services. So, for example, cloud services or high-throughput computing storage services. SurfNet is contributing with attribute, let's say, at the moment I would say with aggregators, but also they plan, needs at least plan to integrate also the VO platform as a service in this pilot, which will be interesting. GAR for a liaison with Jerry 1.4. SESNet will participate also for the VO platform as a service, but also with Perun Attribute Authority, with Perun, that is also an attribute authority, GRNet for attribute aggregation, and then we expect also to have some contribution, or at least exchange of information with Daria for their work on the shibboleth attribute authorities, and with Nikev, with the VOMS attribute authority, VO management system, about which I said something 2 days ago. So these are, let's say, this is the knowledge base that we can start with. Of course, I mean, across the whole project, we will not only focus on these topics or in these specific technical services, but this is, let's say, at least a good starting point for this task. So this is probably, this is probably a question. So when an attribute authority pilot can be considered successful? So this is a question I thought about yesterday, because so far we are doing a quite basic testing of the scenarios. So it's almost work, not work. So if the attributes are propagated and are consumed, so we consider it successful. But of course, we can also develop probably a better set of criteria based on use case. So starting from the use case, if a pilot is successful as long as the use case is fulfilled. So let's say this was the introduction. I will now report a little bit about so the results so far, what we can share from attribute authorities management. So this is the typical workbench of the pilot. We have an IDP. For the moment, we didn't actually worried about having an edugain IDP, or we just needed a shibboleth IDP for this use case. Since in the end the pilot is a non-production deployment, so we didn't care much about the edugain at the moment, at the beginning. Then an attribute management service that can be Hexa, can be Perun, for example. And then these two entities feed information in the aggregator, or better, the service provider can get access through an aggregator to both IDP and attribute authority in a single action, in a single query. But so this is basically what we have so far, but of course we will need also to experiment direct connection between IDPs, SP, and attribute management service. So this is another possible scenario for a workbench. So on which use case we have been focusing so far? To allow, so we needed, so since, let's say, I was starting to put together this pilot, and as again EGI has interest in the resource provisioning services, we need resource provisioning services that has a web interface or a graphical user interface to be compliant with the, let's say, to be SAML ready without much hassle. And for us, the easy answer to this was the cloud management service. So the idea is to use attribute authorities or community management attributes in general to regulate the authorization on a cloud management system. So, as I said, this is a use case important for EGI, but this is not only for EGI. There are probably several research infrastructure who could be interested in such deployment scenario. The goals of this pilot are to provide access to cloud resources with users who own only, let's say, who own a federated credential, and let them manage the VO membership and the VO attributes with their federated credential. And basically what we have deployed is basically the workbench plus a non-production cloud management system. And meaning non-production, we will see later why non-production. So we deployed, we actually haven't deployed, but we got a test instance of EXA from Stacky. We did some very basic test functionalities. So it works. We can manage attributes and we can get out attributes. As I said, testing so far has been a little basic. But so there are some, I wouldn't say issue, but something to consider with EXA, that EXA, at least in the configuration we had, needs to configure explicitly the service provider. So authorized to query attributes from EXA. And of course in an environment where there are several, like a research infrastructure, where there are several service providers, the number of service providers actually is changing, the services provided are changing. So this is probably something that will not scale very well. So an aggregator is in fact a solution also to make like a service proxy for EXA. So how basically the integration with a cloud management system will work. So the workflow is very basic. The user log in the UI of the cloud management system using the federated credential. The service provider, of course, needs to support the virtual organization that the user is claiming he's part of. Then the service provider gets the confirmation of the VO membership of the user from an attribute authority, an external attribute authority. And then if everything matches, the user gets access to the resources. So it's very basic. So now I have a couple of slides focusing on the cloud management system, because we have done some tests again. So this is not specifically about the attribute authorities. This is more about the integration of these attribute authorities with the cloud management system. And I think that this is an important output also for these pilots. It's not only because we are piloting indeed the attribute authorities, but on the other hand, we need to propose something to user communities to manage authorization on their services, which actually works. So we need also to tell them where the issues can be, how to overcome issues, how to properly configure this on the services. And OpenStack, is a quite widespread cloud management system used by a lot of service providers. So it has been supporting OpenStack natively SAML from the Icehouse release. It is supporting the version 3 of the API. And it is, let's say, OpenStack supports both SAML and OpenID Connect. By the way, we tested with SAML. Let's say SAML basically it enables an actual single sign-on. So it's not that OpenStack enables an actual single sign-on. It's not that OpenStack mirrors the user's account locally with a database, etc. No, it's a completely transparent single sign-on, which is good. Users are mapped into the groups that indeed needs to be in OpenStack. So OpenStack, you need not to create the user, you need to create the groups. So I suppose that when a service provider decided to support a community, creates a group, and then use the attributes to map the user coming from an SSO to the groups the user groups within the OpenStack that then are used to allocate resources or to allocate to some capabilities. For what we have tested now, what I can say is that is not out of the box. So OpenStack does not support directly the interaction with an external attribute authority, at least not out of the box as we can test. Probably this may have changed in latest implementations in the new one, but the solution was to use an aggregator. So we had it in the test, the workbench, so it was good. So OpenNebula is a little more tricky because there is no native support for SAML in OpenNebula. It has been, though, developed by Stacky, the developers of Exa. So it is a plugin, meaning that they have a simple SAML PHP module and a patch that connects the core of OpenNebula with the simple SAML PHP. Not being part of the OpenNebula distribution, it's always a little bit tricky, meaning that, let's say, production sites may not want to deploy a non-official piece of software in their cloud management service, but it has been tested working, so at least for, I think, the 4.10, if I'm not wrong, without issues. So we can say that it's fairly safe to deploy it in production for OpenNebula. Again, we made use of an aggregator. So I have a couple of slides of general issues that say raised from this first basic testing that we did. I think they are not necessarily problems, but there are topics for discussion. So one issue is that we can make a very good architecture of attribute authorities, aggregator, and identity providers, but then the service in the end need to have support for federated identities. So this is increasingly true for many services. So I'm not much worried about that. It's just I think that it's important that once we get a use cases from a user community or from a research community, and we cannot just push to them federated identities. We need to know first if their services are actually enabled to that, because if not, they need to consider to put some effort on this, of course. But in general, commercial services, they are, of course, moving towards this industry standard. And the support for a third-party attribute authorities natively, so not, it's probably less common to have like a SAML attribute query performed to a third-party attribute authorities by the service as a normal workflow implemented in the service. So we have the aggregators, and they are doing a good job. So this is very likely that attribute aggregators will be an important bit of the architecture, of the overall architecture. So this is similarly, aggregator can solve the problem of identifying the authoritative attribute authorities, because I would expect that if a community is managing their membership and their groups with an attribute authority, they may even manage the attribute authority by themselves. Then service providers need to know if they want to support a community, which one is the attribute authority that is authoritative. This can be helped by using aggregation. So we configure in the aggregator this bit, or simply services need to attach this to the information of the virtual organization when they do that.
Peter, can I ask you something? Mm-hmm. Is there an agreement that the model to follow is that the service should query the attribute authorities directly? Is this the model that we think would work? Or there is no clear agreement that is the way to go?
So no, there is not. Okay. And the fact is that it's not how it's working in most of the cases. So the service providers, most of the service providers, they do one query for the overall set of attributes of the user. So that's why aggregators are important in the architecture. Yeah, exactly. But in case services do that, they of course need to know. Well, in general, services need to know actually which are the attributes they want to use to map to map the user into their groups. So in fact, I would say that some level of uniform attributes naming is required, or at least an attribute mapping service. So I would expect if we as an infrastructure, EGI or another infrastructure, deploy an attribute aggregator, when they are in contact with a new community, the one question that we need to ask is which one are the attributes that qualify, that your attribute authority releases to qualify the user part of your community. So which one should we check? And basically, if possible, we will need to do a mapping to make our service provider to avoid that our service provider needs to look for different attributes depending on the user community served. Then, another one could be, now I'm not sure if I explained it well because it's something I thought about in the past and then I didn't actually discuss much. About the overload of attributes. So, for example, let's consider the possibility that a community wants to vet some of the attributes coming out of the IDP, and, for example, the email of the user or other attributes that are, let's say, usually released by the IDP, but they are actually provided with a higher level of assurance by the community. So how can we consider this and provide the right attribute to the service provider?
But that sounds like a luxury problem we don't have right now.
Yeah, exactly. Not yet. This is indeed probably.
There are especially if you start to do attribute aggregation on behalf of multiple VOs, this will become a very interesting problem because you will have multiple VOs providing similar attributes to something like EGI.
Yeah. So users part of multiple VOs, for example.
Elixir could be providing an attribute authority, providing attributes, and Clarin could be providing, and the user might actually not type in his name in the same way for whatever reason, and that's already a problem. So this is definitely a problem we need to deal with. And some of the solution might be in your previous slide in the last bullet, where we better harmonize the values, but there's definitely attributes where we basically have a problem.
So we then... Yeah.
So there are two aspects of the problem. The first one is the attribute, the definition of the attributes, and the other is the attribute value. So I would put conflict resolution in the title. I think that would make it more clear. So one problem is you get multiple emails. Which email to use? That's a conflict resolution on the attribute value. The other aspect that Niels mentioned is when you express the same information with using different attribute types.
Basically, the scenario would be, okay, EGI receives an Elixir attribute stating this person is an admin, and a Clarin statement that this person is an admin. What do you do?
Can I say something about this? Don't ask this question. So, I mean, this overcomplicates things and it makes the discussion much more difficult. I think we should try, within this activity, within the infrastructure and the research communities to come up with a common definition of attributes. Now, the discussion about exchanging attributes across infrastructures should be done, but not now, because if we start discussing this now, we dilute all the other problems. So I would really like you to drive the discussion in SE1, in JR1, I don't know where, of having a common set of attributes, the minimal viable set of attributes that everybody can agree upon, and then start from that step and go forward. But not start the discussion now of how to exchange attributes and how to harmonize attributes from one infrastructure to the other, because we will miss all the other problems, and I think we will not be able also to solve this problem. I think we should take it step by step.
So I slightly disagree, because I think that it's true that we can come out with the best practice for everybody about the attributes, but it will happen that there will be communities with an already existing attribute authorities they don't want to mess much with coming with different attributes names. So I think that perhaps not necessarily this, but an attribute mapping, to experimenting the attribute aggregators attribute mapping. So this is probably something that we will use anyway in the future.
So, yes, but again, my point is that deal with it within the infrastructure, research infrastructure for the time being. We're not there yet to deal with a common way of actually pushing attributes across research infrastructures. And if we put it now on the problem space and identify it and try to solve it now, we will miss everything else.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying. I'm not saying that we should not do it. I'm saying that we should do it a bit later on, when we have the important pieces there to be able to solve this problem, which we don't have right now.
I don't disagree. It's just, so I think that it's what we should do. It's not that we are making best practice for attribute mapping, but as you said, we are giving to the infrastructure doing this, but we kind of testing the tools they will use to do so. So we are not necessarily.
My comment goes towards Niels, not towards you. What you said here is fine.
Okay. I think your next few slides are about planning. Maybe we can do that later on in the next slot. So maybe we can move to the final slide with the other questions about feedback.
Okay. So basically about feedback, so I think that we already have a set of attribute authorities we will work with, but of course, which one should we pilot, which one should be more higher priority in this work, and if there are more to do, to work with, of course, the better. And of course, I think it's the use cases. It's important that we have more use cases as well for these pilots. I naively think that the use cases for attribute management are quite similar, but I think that nevertheless that we need more of them. So hopefully this will come out from the interviews that we'll be doing in JR1 perhaps, and hopefully.
First of all, I think about the technology, we should do this work in JR1.1 in the task you are leading, actually, to identify the technologies. But something that I'm missing, and possibly it's not part of SE1. Now, I really like the use cases you presented, because all the use cases have real value. This is something that somebody outside of the project can look at and say, this is interesting. But from my point of view now in JR1, I'm missing some stuff which is more low level and probably not so interesting to the wider public. So for example, I would really like to have a way to pilot and experiment on different ways to integrate and interact with attribute authorities. We had a very nice discussion yesterday with Niels about front channel, back channel, attribute query. Attribute query is back channel, but the benefits of it, about push versus pull model. Now, this stuff, they need to be piloted somewhere, and I'm not sure whether this is JR1 territory or SA1 territory.
So you actually want a sort of play garden?
Yes, because and I think it's very important because it's a very new thing, and we need really to understand also these elements.
Well, actually, there's one play garden already, and Misha and Tom will tell us about that later on after the break. But I agree it would be nice to have a little bit more, and I think we have some experience already as well. So.
The general comment is that we need to test some lower level stuff where we should try to do them. And I think this is something we need to agree probably between us, because when you try to do the exercise and actually create the flows and create a solution, you stumble upon these little problems. And personally, I don't have a solution to them. I want to experiment with this, and we should agree where we do this, in S1 or 01. But I like the high level use cases that you presented very much.
Yeah, but I think that I agree, but to do this, we need the input from the pilot that you are suggesting. Because when we started, we didn't have an architecture. So in fact, in my next steps slides, I have a point about implementing the values that are suggested by the one.
Yeah, but we need to try something to start thinking whether it really works in practice. Yeah.
Well, and then about the multitask pilots, meaning pilots integrating attribute authorities and token translation, which is something for the future. I wonder if you should start planning now, but probably it's better to wait for the first architecture document.
Yeah, I will get back to that one later on as well. Well, I think we're about 15 minutes behind schedule, but let's have a coffee now, and I propose get back in 15 minutes, okay? Thank you, Peter. Okay, let's move on again. Okay, Mika will continue with the topic integration with commercial services, and then after that one we will move to the token translation topic. So please go ahead, Mika.
Okay. I will start talking about commercial service providers' involvement in our project. The whole work done so far is pretty fresh. First, I would start with description of the task and its aims from the technical annex. We shall pilot SSO access for commercial services for research community. And we shall consider both technical problems and legal aspects of this pilot. So there is close collaboration. There should be close collaboration with JRA1 and NA3. And we should build on work done in GN3+. And again, there's a stress on the user community, because we shall select services together with user community to ensure that the pilot is usable for the end users. So that there's the first questions that arrived. How we shall select this community who we could contact to head this community. Well, it's open. The question is open. I don't know if anyone can now answer it.
I think that based on the requirements collected in JRE 1.1 or the interviews that we will do, so we will have user stories that will probably where you probably can fish the topics that you want to start with, for example. So I think that we already have a lot of use cases for several different approaches to access to resources. So I think that.
Yeah, these use cases are very interesting because the requirements, the document contains the general requirements, but we also are interested exactly which services that should serve some special practical needs, special use cases. We should focus on that. And it's also stressed that we should involve some community people within the process of piloting. We should involve them in selecting the service for piloting, and also we should involve them in the tests. So I think it's still open, but we have to answer these questions.
One short remark. So we are in contact with the LibreOffice people that are working on a LibreOffice online version, which and we sort of are working on the concept of the identity management. And maybe that would be a good use case, because in the end we have JavaScript-based authentication, which goes to the LibreOffice server, and the LibreOffice server then needs to get a token to access any cloud space environment. And we're thinking about own cloud to test this. I don't know whether this is a community, but it is definitely an interesting test case.
I think the community is just a group of end users, so I think it could be a good point. Problem statement we already discussed. The awareness and understanding what EduGain really is, and federation and interfederation really is not very high among commercial service providers, so that there's a need for learning and guiding them. And also there's a need for development of some solutions. There's lack of some important services, because commercial providers usually use single identity providers, and even if they have some SAML solutions in place, they are used to connect to single ADP. So there's a need for discovery service. And from point of view, from organizational point of view, the registration procedure is confusing for them, because if the company is pan-European, it still shall register to a national federation, not pan-European, which is confusing. There are also different policies in different federations, and also probably different requirements. So from that point of view, probably we should provide some guides and some best practices how to do it for the commercial providers. Also, problem can be the set of attributes they get from different IDPs, because first of all, these sets of attributes are sometimes not compatible, and sometimes are not enough to give personalized service to the end user. So probably the practical result of the pilot might be a set of attributes that we can suggest that should be available in IDPs.
We're competing now. We have reached that level. Very brief comment about the need for development environment and guidelines. I'm not sure I understood what you said, but basically the comment we got is that they need an IDP which is a dummy IDP just to play against.
Test.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Something like this, so that they can test their implementation. That was the idea behind it.
No, kind of.
And it,
well, you're talking about the fader one. You're talking about the fader one.
No. This is not what they need. Actually, they need something like open fader.
Yes,
yeah.
That was what I wanted to ask. But you know that service is
exactly
going to die. So what should we do for that? Because some people are asking whether AARC will take care of that, or not. So do we take care of that?
So yeah, I think.
No. Huh? Okay, so you will take care of that. Okay.
Yeah, but we need something that you can create accounts like that. I mean, it should not have a formal process. This is the whole idea. Something to play against in an easy way. And OpenFading was great for that.
Any guest IDP allows that, I guess. But anyway, I had another question. I understand anything on this slide except the need for a globally unique ID for the user. Why must it be globally unique and not just unique in the context of the federation or whatever?
I think it should be unique in order to access your resources and exactly to know that it's your resource. At least it should be unique at service provider level. Yeah, but when there are several federations connected to it should be, I would say, a namespace problem. So your ID should be also unique on the federation level or inter-federation level.
The requirement was very clear that we received from everyone. A persistent, unique identifier, not limited to specific federation, specific SPs. Because the thing is that the communities behind the scenes, they want to interact with each other, and they want to be able to identify that this is the same user.
Okay, that I understand, but that's actually a community requirement, not an SP requirement. Because the SP couldn't care less.
Actually, it becomes an SP requirement when the SP is something more complex than one instance.
Okay, now I understand.
Communities want to interact between infrastructure, between communities, then service providers are having to enable them. And that's where actually service providers will identify.
Yeah, but I definitely understand that requirement. But if I'm simply logging in with my IP into a service, there's just no reason for a globally unique ID unless I need to share that over, say, communities, for example, and then it will completely make sense. Or SPs, yeah.
So if you start talking about the systems for token translation systems and after doing things on behalf of user delegation, you come up with something.
Okay, so there's a proposal of scope of commercial service pilots. The first point is that we shall cooperate with NA2 to involve the commercials. As said before, if they need explanation and support. And then, because one of biggest problems identified is lack of service discovery. So our solution may focus on service discovery, and the aim is not to connect any specific commercial provider to EduGain, because it's more operational work of EduGain, but rather to improve the technical enrollment of commercial service providers, so the solution shall be generic. And also we need concrete use case and concrete community in order the pilot is usable. So if we have such a scope, there are some questions. What types of commercial services we need? The answer should come from the use case or from the community. Also, we like to set up pilot with SSO, web SSO only, or not non-web resources too, and focus on only on authentication, or also on some attribute management as well. So I don't know if anybody want to comment on that. Not ready answers yet. Okay.
How many is simple? At minimum one.
Yeah. Okay. We also have to select providers. We did some. Yeah.
I was processing. Yeah. There was something. You said how many? It's more than. I would agree with Niels. I mean, let's agree on one, but it's more which one. I think probably who decides on which one. I think probably we should ask the communities which one they would like to see.
Yes. That's because that's the reason why the first question is to select the community and use case, and plan the whole work for the community and this use case. But also we have to select some partners from the commercials to work with. We did some desk research. Our colleagues from CERN advised to look at Helix Nebula project because there are some commercial providers involved who are already involved in commercial and public cooperations. We think that this kind of companies will be more happy with work with us. And the second source of possible providers is Rand Cloud Catalog. Some of the companies, as you can see, are the same in both projects. So the selection criteria is, as I said, involvement in public commercial cooperations. And we thought about medium-sized companies, big enough to have potential, but small enough to be ready to talk with us. But as Paul said, some people also have the good cooperation with bigger players, so it's still an open question. And also we should cooperate with the community. Maybe they have also some experience and can advise us. And here the questions are again about the above criteria. Also, if anyone can suggest another providers he have good experience with, we are also open to hear about it. Well, the question is also if we shall limit to the companies based in Europe or not.
I think this guest IDP thing we discussed is a low-hanging fruit that will be very useful for us internally, because all the pilots we are going to do, they need to have an IDP to play with. So we need it. We can do something around it, and we can... This is perfect, but I mean, if we have this, then perhaps it's something that we can publicize also outside. So, okay, most of these guys there in the Xant, Cloud Catalog, and the Helipstick Nebula have already gone through the process, so I think they will not need it. But we can make this available, at least for the duration of the project, also to GN4, for any of the new cloud providers they are trying to reach out, to be able to use this kind of thing. So if you can have a good offering around it, I think this is a very low-hanging fruit, and it can give us quite some visibility on actually fixing a real problem we have today.
Well, as far as I know about Helix Nebula companies, they have to call it marketplace, which is kind of broker, but still the authorization is and authentication is not addressed by this project. You can use this broker to select service, but you cannot use your federated ID to access. Okay, maybe I will skip that. We also looked at some discovery service solutions. First, Surf Connect is an working service that can be used for testing with testing cooperation between service providers and IDPs. Maybe it's not the only one, and some exist in other runs. Another one is DiscoJuice, which is a library and can be used for implementing discovery service at the service provider. And next, Shibboleth Discovery Service is a web application can be used to set up such a service for different providers. And also we should look into this magic deliverable. And there's a number of tools mentioned there, and it just needs to be checked. Yeah, and finally, the work plan. The most important thing is to involve the user community and find suitable use case we can implement. Having this, we can define exact scope of the pilot, including community representatives in this process. Then contact candidate providers and start setting up pilots. Probably we should involve at least 2 commercial service providers. Do you have any questions on that presentation? So thank you.
Yes.
If anyone needs your boarding passes printed, let me know now. Just raise your hand.
Did you, I don't know if it's the right one, but did you consider the EGI Federated Cloud in terms of use case? Because they are dealing with a platform which has an open part and then a commercial plugins for commercial providers. Could that be of interest for? I see it as a natural environment, but I don't know.
Is it a bit cheating?
Oh, why?
Well, they're already a pilot partner. They're already a project partner.
I know, but they have a task which deals with interfacing. It's the EGI Federated Cloud. Is an activity as such, and it involves many stakeholders of EGI.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean,
Well,
I don't know if it's cheating, but it's.
Yes, I think we shall consider it. As I said, this work on commercial providers, on commercial pilots is quite fresh. So, okay. The next part is on token translation services. The aim of this task is to provide AI mechanisms to access non-web services, and also to pilot mechanisms identified in JRE1 to integrated services that are not yet accessible. First, I would like to explain some problem that arises with non-web services, especially on the SSH protocol. The main problem is that it has built-in authentication, which uses local passwords or pair of keys, and IDP is not involved in that process. So by design, from our point of view, it's problematic. We don't have mechanisms like redirection on client side, which is available in web browsers, for example. And also, this kind of access needs a local account. So usually the registration step is required to set up such an account. And possible workarounds for these problems are first to use enhanced client, some profile, which needs to modify the client software. It is used, for example, by Moonshot, and this modification of client software is quite problematic because of variety of these clients, and not always the clients will be happy with the users will be happy with the client we can provide. Second workaround is to pass IDP credentials to service provider, but this is a security gap because you have to fully trust your service provider. But this approach is used by LDAP Facade. And another solution is local authentication, which means that the user have to log into service provider with local credentials, but it doesn't follow quite SSO idea, because you need local credentials. And then the servers can use some assertion query profile to ask the IDP if the user is still authenticated. And on the server side, we have two possible solutions. we would have to modify the server application or supplement some existing AA mechanisms like PAM modules or LDAP. And
how can we accept any scenario that would pass IDP credentials to the SP?
I don't know. It's hardly to accept, but it's used in ADAP facade. I would accept maybe only if the service provider is really my service on my provider, on my institutional. Yeah, but it's really a problem.
I think we need clear requirements for that in JRA1, I think. So we can make that assessment and decide together what we want and what we don't want.
Yeah, also to be clear about these passwords. Of course, currently the user password travels and is being stored in this LDAP component. And that is clearly unacceptable. I mean, there's no question about that. And the plan, it is in practice possible to put the full SAML assertion. But OpenSSH client doesn't accept so long passwords. But PuTTY, for instance, does it. And the plan is to just replace the full SAML assertion with a link to the SAML assertion. And just copy paste the URL, which serves as a temporary password instead. And in the future, we would also put the OAuth access token for supporting OpenID Connect with the same thing. That's the plan, the roadmap. All right.
Okay, just a small correction there, Michael. Moonshot does not modify the client software. Moonshot would be the server software that would be modified. So it's just literally the SSH server that fixes, and it's not a customization of any sort. It just fixes some shortcomings in the GSS API mechanisms, or rather in the implementation of the mechanisms in SSH. So it's not really any customization of that sort. But once that's done, then things like FeduShare, which uses actually a SAML ECP mechanism, will work without any modification. So any future mechanisms that run via GSS API will then work.
If you like to use the standard command line SSH client, you cannot do that with Moonshot.
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
All you need on the system, on the client, as in on the client device, is the client software.
Yeah.
As in the Moonshot client software that needs to be installed. But that's not a modification of the SSH client, the actual command line client. You don't modify any of that. It's just it exposes the Moonshot EAP mechanism onto the system to tell the SSH client, by the way, I don't just have Kerberos, but I also have Moonshot. And on the server side, the system will actually look at that and go, oh, you support Moonshot, okay, so let's negotiate using Moonshot. That's all it does.
But to put it in another way, you still need some additional software on the client side to make it working.
So that is that's a slightly
it's
semantics.
But it's much better than modifying each client.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just one comment. I don't know if it makes sense, but I would like to have all these discussions captured in MJRA 1.1.
That's what I wanted to say, yeah.
And put all the scrutiny there and make sure that basically what comes out from that work is something that is usable in SE1.
Yeah.
So that's why I would really like to have everybody that basically they are involved in tools to look into that document and provide the input there to make sure that we capture all these important questions and come up with a list of solutions that meet the requirements right now. Now I understand that you said that the LDAP facade has some capabilities, but some of them will be implemented in the future. So it would be nice also to have an idea when in the future.
Yeah.
Because okay, I mean, if something is right around the corner next month, fine. But if it will come in 2 years' time, then perhaps it's a good idea for ARC 2, not for now.
Yeah, I think we have to make this clear distinction: what it's able to do now and what in the future. But also, I would like to stress again, and maybe that's something for the next ARC meeting, that we put these kind of discussions into the JRA1 slot and focus in the SA1 slot on the pilots themselves.
I totally agree with you. But okay, let's discuss it offline, because I think we need to have some more time to discuss this stuff there, and we didn't have the time.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, we have not enough time to describe the architectures, but in general, the idea behind LDAP facade is to replace the LDAP by some tool that would do some more sophisticated authentication. And so as said before, there are two access modes with currently available. Full trust is with passing your password to the service provider, and limited trust uses assertion query, and it can be set up with pair of keys authentication, so the user is not forced to remember local password, but can log into SSH resource using these keys, and then the authentication is done by LDAP facade. I think it's quite a good workaround, because from the point of user, it needs some configuration at the beginning. But then it is seamless. The user really doesn't have to authenticate himself. There's a list of requirements we checked of LDAP facade with the requirements deliverable. The user and service provider friendliness, I would say for the user, yes. For service provider, some things could be automated, and some documentation can be improved. I mean, the process of the installation and configuration could be better, but I think it's a thing that could be solved. It's not a general problem. There's community-based authorization on place. There's a federation solution. We have persistent and unique user identifiers. Correct me if I'm wrong in something. We have up-to-date identity information, because the identity is checked each time the user is accessing the resource. User groups are in place. They are based on attributes provided by the identity provider. So it's a good point, but the missing part is some attributes between different IDPs, so possibly some cooperation between people from different institutions could be problematic. I think it's also a good point for further pilot or some work to integrate some attribute management with the facade. Yeah, and we have browser and non-browser federated access. The status of our pilot is that we have it installed. We have a working portal. It's almost everything is okay, except the logging to the service itself. We are currently working on that. There were some issues connected to inconsistency of attributes of all the of our IDP we are using currently and the attributes that are expected by LDAP facade. It's currently configured for PSNC IDP, and if we have the service working, then we will register it in Pioneer ID, which is connected to EduGain, and it will be then available for all EduGain users, at least potentially. Conclusions are that the software runs in German in production, so it must be matured and stable enough. But some configuration, there were some issues with configuration and installation. But the support is in place, so no problem for us. But in general, it could be improved. The good point is that LDAP facade automatically reads metadata of all the whole federation, so it's quite nice. And the moonshot architecture, don't want to describe the whole the difference. I would say what is the difference? The main difference is that here the authentication comes from the client through secure channel in the service, and we have also the trust infrastructure, which is a bit different from the so far approach.
Yeah. Mikael, I hope you don't mind, but maybe we should skip the further details and can we go on to slide 12 where you already created a table with some comparison, and I think that's where we should start. And I'm also wondering who will do that in GRA1 to make these comparisons, extend the number of columns with maturity of the stack, the security requirements, user friendliness, that kind of stuff.
Yes, I think we can do, but I started with two simple tables to compare the different translation services. The first one is about protocols. It shows from which to which protocol it translates, and I think most important is the right column, because it shows that the domain of and possible use cases are quite different for all these services, because they just translate to different protocols. And if we go to the next slide, because the protocol is also connected to possible use case, and for example for LDAP facade we have the use case is to access the resource via SSH or SFTP. In Moonshot we can access web and non-web resources, but with GSS enabled server, which is not the case of the common SSH server. In case of Unity, we can. It's very flexible, because there are. It supports lots of protocols, but it can translate between them. But the protocols that are on its backend are rather used for web resources, or at least resources available via web services, SOAP protocol. So also the scope of it is a bit different. And finally, CI logon. It uses certificates. So also the use case is our services that need certificates, like typically grid services like grid FTP or gatekeeper or something like that. So the conclusion would be that we cannot compare these solutions in single use case, because the domain of possible use cases are rather different for all of these tools. So quickly, the work plan. First, we should finalize our work on LDAP facade pilot to make it working with the test service and to register it with Pioneer ID to make available for everybody. We would like also involve some potential users in testing and also gather some feedback from them and make even better assessment of the service. The question is here also what you want to achieve with this pilot. It's a question for SA1. If we should widen the scope, or just the assessing is enough, or I don't know what SA1 can be interested in the terms of LDAP facade. Also, we would like to do some pilot work with another technologies. We consider Unity, but for Unity, because it uses many protocols, we need very clear use case, because you have to select protocols on front end and back end, so it makes no sense to set up all protocols in front end and back end. So again, it's a question for SA1 which kind of pilot can be interesting. And also we shall consider and discuss pilots for the second year. As stated, we should somehow integrate the technologies. For example, we can try guest access to non-web services to combine some different technologies. That's all from my side. Sorry for being a bit late. Are there any questions?
I would really appreciate a better understanding on the JARray side of this activity. So actually the last slides made the most sense to me, in all honesty. Oh yeah, well the ones that actually do the comparison and yes, so slides like these. And I think indeed, as you said as well, and then we need to find a really good use case with actually a community preferably to test something like Moonshot or CI logon or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. We have lots of questions now. What shall we do? Because we can do almost many things with these technologies, but what the question is, what is really worth doing and testing?
So I already sent an email 5 minutes ago to have a genuine video conference this Friday to discuss two items. One item is this document, and I think it is very important if we can have the input from SU1, because We can list the tools and the libraries and everything. We can do some comparisons in general, but we need to do the comparisons that are meaningful basically to us, right? So we need to have this input, and I think what we already have done here, it's very important and very interesting. So Peter, I mean, we should take note of this work and try to drive this in JRE1, because it's not just capturing the tools, but actually doing all this analysis to understand what is the ecosystem and the current situation.
I don't know how to phrase my question. I'll try. So, I mean, we do need some translation services. This is clear. And this is really, what you would like to do is to make some evaluation of which tools we should keep, let's say, and which others we shouldn't. And for some, I suppose, Moonshot, etc., there has been already work done that, you know, we don't need to spend a lot of time on the testing. For others, maybe Unity, it's a bit, you know, the only people I'm aware that are really using that a lot are the UDAT. So maybe there you want to have a second opinion to check if effectively it's okay. And equally, Celogon, I think we have now enough experience on that I don't think we need extensive testing to decide what to do. So what I would say that really, from my point of view, but I may be very wrong here, the two that are more that are worth looking at are the LDAP facade, whether there is really a case for keeping this or not, and the Unity part. I mean, also because it's very much at the moment within a community, and we may want to look at some other things that are missing here that will pop up there. Is this correct, or am I going too far?
You're going much too far.
I think you're absolutely right, but I wouldn't rule out the other ones. I mean, we need to look all of them, but yeah, exactly. But for this you mentioned, we need probably to start from scratch. I know that Unity is also used in EGI. I'm not very knowledgeable about the implementation. Yep. So, the capabilities of Unity are a bit not clear to me. What Unity does and what is external services that are implementing. So yes, we definitely need to do this, and for these two tools we need to start basically from scratch, more or less.
Sure.
Just a short one, and plus one for LDAP facade. I can see for praise, I can see that it may be of interest there, because there the primary thing is access to praise resources, SSH. It depends on how attributes can be handled. LDAP facade, so a plus one for that.
If LDAP facade does not happen, you can look at what FeduShare is doing. FeduShare is something that I was made aware of at Internet 2 at the beginning of the month. They are building on some of the technology that, yes, that Moonshot has come up with. However, it does use SAML ECP on the client side, so it is a small modification of the SSH client specifically, not the SSH server, but it works completely standards compliant, because Scott Cantor, who is one of the primary developers behind Shibboleth, is involved in this project, and he is driving the SAML EC mechanism, the GSS mechanism, through IETF at the moment. So this is just one of the alternatives. So it may, what, for FeduShare? Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, but it is an alternative. I mean, if you get a lot of resistance from IDPs going, no, we're not using LDAP facade. or we're not letting you use it. It's just an option.
But on a maturity level, I mean, this is not being deployed currently, right? There's no production version of this anywhere.
No production yet. Pilot. They're working on pilot.
What I find interesting, to give you one example, is when I talked yesterday to Mikael and today to Manne, and well, for Elixir they have had a look at the CERN WebFTS or STS, and well, they told me, well, what we know now from CI logon, not that I have a preference for CI logon, but what we know now, this solution might do the job for us in Elixir as well, and well, I think that's the kind of flow and thinking we should adopt within AARC, that the solution fits with the requirements, and you can say, well, CI logon, for example, has a large user base, the code is still maintained, and that's the kind of decisions we should make and think about, I think. Okay, shall we move on to a demo on CI logon? Thank you, Mikael. So, Misha and Tom, please come over here.
Am I understandable when I stand? Or use your microphone? Okay, yeah, but then I have two. I can also sit down. Is there a pointer?
Yeah, this one.
Then I will sit down.
Yeah, you sit? Okay.
Ah, that's good.
Yeah, you have the microphone working.
Hi. So, let me. Well, yeah, okay. It's called the CI logon pilot, but in some ways it's not really CI logon we are piloting, but that will come later. So, let me say first about our use case. So the typical scenario is a science gateway. Oh, great, thank you. A science gateway. Think of, well, this could be the long tail of science, but there are all kinds of science gateways. LHC experiments use science gateways effectively, like the Panda job submission system. We don't want the users to need to see their certificates. They use certificates, but they shouldn't see it. The science gateway would need to have a certificate. And currently, this is usually done with robot certificates, but we don't like that so much because with robot certificates, you don't know, you can't really trace the individual users. And in cases of incidents, that's a problem. And also for accounting, it's much more tricky. So we like the users to have real user certificates, but still not see them themselves. Now, there are also some users who would still need command line usage, but they still, it would be best if they didn't need to handle their private keys, lose their private key, install their private key in browsers in internet cafes and things like that. And the last requirement we have for our whole wish list is that the implementation and the adaptations needed for the science gateways should be very simple. We don't want the science gateways to need to know everything about security, so they should just use some simple and standard scenarios and tools. Now, a little bit about the pilot and about CI logon. CI logon is developed in the US. It's widely used there. It's connected with their federation, and there are a number of different flows. And we'll mainly focus on the, I hope I will manage, this is the lamp, that's not the right one. Here we go. I will mainly focus on this portal delegation. So the first, let's first say something about the first one. The first type of portal you typically see for CI logon is very similar to what we use for the TCS and also, well, what's now the DigiCert portal basically, where you download your user certificate. Now, this is typically not what we want because we didn't want the user to need to handle the certificate. The second scenario is portal delegation, where the user logs in, but in the end, the certificate ends up on some portal. So that's what we focus on. Yeah. Yep. So actually, it's not really a CLI logon pilot, but the tool we use is effectively one of the components, which is typically called OAuth for my proxy. And OAuth for my proxy is essentially a web front end for a my proxy server. And a my proxy server, if you don't know it, it's well, there are basically two different modes. It can either function as an online CA, or it can function as a credential store. It can even function as both, but we don't do that. Yeah, we prefer not to do that. And the online CA is actually quite a simple interface, because basically it uses some OpenSSL commands where you can put in any engine, basically, so you can use custom certificates, but you can also use hardware security models. As long as OpenSSL has support for it, you can use it for your online CA. And the credential store will eventually, that's the place where the actual certificate will get stored. So, now I realize that this is a full page. I hope it's big enough. I used colors. I hope there are no colorblind people here, or at least not too many. But there is also a small thingy around the things. So the yellow blob here, the yellow stuff here, is basically what we use from CI logon. So you have your CA here and a my proxy server here, and then this is the server we're using. This effectively is a OpenID Connect authorization service with an extra endpoint called something like getCert, which, if you provide it with a token, will provide you with a certificate here. Then we have the blue bits. The blue bits on the left-hand side are run by the virtual organizations. And this is where the user enters. So this is the science gateway. I've called it the VO portal because it's typically run by a virtual organization, but could also be run by EGI. I'll say something about these FOM services later. And then in the middle, we have basically, it's effectively one service where we have this tool here, which is what we're developing. This is effectively a client, an OpenID Connect client, an OAuth for my proxy client at the same time. And the end entity certificate will end up in this second my proxy server here. So there's a my proxy server here functioning as a CA, and a my proxy server here to store the end entity certificate. Now, as you might notice, there is also a, so yeah, okay, let's first start with the typical flow. So the user goes in with his web browser, enters here at this VO portal, and now the VO portal thinks, well, I need a certificate for this guy. I need to have a short-lived certificate, so I need a proxy certificate. And then the VO portal redirects to this master portal. Master portal says, well, you first need to be logged in, so he redirects to this delegation server, the OAuth. So this is standard OpenID Connect flow. He says, well, you need to have a login. Then you will do a where are you from plus shibboleth login at your home IDP. You'll go back to this delegation server where you will give consent, and then in the end you will flow back to this one. He then has a OpenID Connect token, which he can use to retrieve a certificate here, which he will store here. Now, the next time you enter, you will do exactly the same flow till here, but then you will use your OpenID Connect token to first check the user info endpoint here, to check whether who the user is, and then he can check whether he already has a certificate and return directly a proxy certificate without the need for a new certificate, end entity certificate. The good thing of that is that you basically cache the end entity certificate and you don't drain your CA. Now, another very useful thing of this my proxy credential store here is that you can obtain proxies certificates from a my proxy store with all kinds of tools. You could directly use command line tools, but that is a little bit tricky because you need to authenticate somehow. So we came up with a trick, namely to put an SSH server in front with an authorized keys file which can run a specific command, and actually that specific command is retrieve a proxy from here and return it to the user. So a user who needs UIs with a proxy certificate can go directly with on this UI or a worker node or something like that, he uses his SSH agent forwarding, and with his SSH key, he logs into this SSH server and he gets a proxy certificate returned, which will be saved to disk. And the user, you would say, but then the user has a certificate. But the problem, the advantage here is that if you save it to disk in the right file, that the user actually doesn't even see it as such. He just knows that he got a token somewhere and that the system magically knows which token to use. And it's very similar actually to what Kerberos is doing. So, I think so what we're now going to do, we are going to demonstrate this. Tom is going to demonstrate this, so we just swapped the cable and then we had to do something on the display which I forgot. I think you need one of those two, right? Boom, boom, boom. He's coming. I forgot.
Yeah. No, it's yours.
Oh, great. So.
All right.
If you can put both on the screen.
I'm just gonna put.
Great.
I'm just gonna put up the slides next to the demo.
Yeah, here you have the microphone.
Yeah.
Good. Perfect.
So first, what the user would do is he would.
Top button.
Thanks. He would go to the VO portal, as Misha said. And what we have is like a very simplistic VO portal right here, or Science Gateway, that we can specify a VO that we want to be part of or we want to authenticate to. So now I have a test VO up there. I can also specify a FCAN for getting additional roles. So let's say I want to get the dummy role. And then we just go forward. So the next step, we didn't see a bunch of things, but we got redirected to the master portal first. And in the background, we also got redirected down here and asked to authenticate. So what we see here is a wave. Where are you from? This is the ServConnect test instance that you're seeing here. So I choose my home IDP here and authenticate as a famous professor. Yes, the #1 professor. Right. And then at this point, I just released all my attributes to the delegation server here. Now, before anything else happens, you also have to give consent at the delegation server. So this is not the same consent as you would give at your home IDP for releasing your attributes. This is the consent that you give to a OAuth client that he's authorized to release whatever resources that you have down here, which is going to be ultimately your user certificate. So this is also like a simplistic approval page. I just click approve. And we don't see a lot of things happening from here on because everything is happening in the background. So what happened here, you already see the results back at the VO portal, but what really happened is that the user got authenticated here and gave consent. Then the master portal asked whether the user already has a user certificate in the credential store or not. In case not, it would create a new one via this flow and just create a proxy with the asked capabilities and roles. And then send it back to the VO portal afterwards. And that's where we ended up now. This is the VO portal with some VOMS information and the proxy itself, which would then user wouldn't see, but just would use it for depending on the use case. Teaser of the private key.
Yes. So now you should know how to go back. This one?
Maybe it's automatic.
No.
One moment. Okay. Okay.
Ah, great. Yeah, so the interesting thing is that we will have to do this again for a second part of our demo. So, yes. So the main features of the setup are basically, well, the certificate is hidden from the user. I mean, we now showed it. Sorry for the... We showed it in the VO portal, but basically this would normally not happen. It would be saved to disk there somewhere. All the private keys, except the one from the FOMS proxy, are saved in my proxy stores and are as such a very safe place. The online CA is very flexible. You can easily move it to an HSM, or you can replace it with all kinds of things. We have a very modular setup. The yellow bits, I didn't say that, but the yellow bits, these bits would typically be a central service within Europe, or perhaps even globally. The red bits here would typically be run by an instance like EGI, or be a national setup. And you could have these bits which are, well, basically completely independent of that, as long as they're trusted by, as long as there's some trust relation between those two. So that gives it a very modular setup. The protocol for the OAuth for my proxy is very much standardized and is even getting, well, the remaining bits are also getting standardized. We're involved with that. Well, I'm involved with that in any case, in some way. We do integrate with FOMS, which is functioning as an attribute provider. And we have a non-web backdoor. And that's what we will discuss a little bit in the next slide. And I think then we were doing the demo for that. So basically, the VO portal could upload a SSH public key to the master portal. This is in a sense a very similar setup as what GitHub is doing, and also what CERN is actually doing. So the user uploads his public key, and then that can be used for authenticating in all kinds of different ways. So the master portal could store this, for example, in an LDAP. The SSH server would run some cron job to retrieve those SSH keys from the LDAP and create a custom authorized key file with a special account. And this special account can only run one command, which is a sort of some wrapper to my proxy logon. SVN is also using this, so GitHub is using this. There are all kinds of bits of software doing this. And as long as you can do SSH agent forwarding, you can basically get proxies wherever you like. And a very simple wrapper, you can just save the resulting proxy, and it's similar to a Kerberos ticket. Well, the good thing here is that you don't need any extra passwords. Or use federation passwords on command lines. I know that a lot of people like ECP. I have a personal problem with ECP on the command line because I don't like users to enter their federation password in a tool they don't know. A web browser is one thing, but it's at least one place. But if you have some command line tool, you have no clue. I have a bit of the same problem with Moonshot, but I will not go into that. But in this case, you don't need that because you use your SSH agent. So, yeah. Now let's see. Last time it went automatic. This time it doesn't.
People did some magic from.
Yeah, I think he did some magic. No, it was not the right one.
Shall we ask him for help?
That might be a good idea. Can't be that difficult, right? How difficult can it be?
There's a backdoor button there.
No.
How do I get it back on the screen after?
No.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And then
Thank you.
afterwards, if I need it back there, which one to return? Yes.
Yeah.
I think this is a demo in a demo.
Okay, I'll try it out.
All right. Sure. So we are not going to show the first part of this. Make your phone bigger. I can't. We're not going to show the first part of this setup because we don't have the SSH key provisioning just yet. We're going to show once the SSH keys are actually inside the SSH server, how can you get it? How can you get a proxy out of it? I realize this is kind of small. It's all right.
Increase font size. Control plus.
No.
Control Shift plus. Yes.
Ah. Who knew? All right. So here I have an SSH command to SSH to the credential into the credential store as acting as the SSH server. And you see that this is this special account that Misha was talking about, this proxy door, which can only run this myproxy logon wrapper and nothing else. So that's what it's going to do, and then just store the outcome of it to a temporary file. And you can also specify VOs afterwards and fcans just as before, in case you want a VOMSified proxy and not just a simple proxy. So after I run this,
I think you're missing a domain name.
waiting for the network.
I think you have no network connectivity to SSH.
Yeah, looks like I can connect to the host.
Yes. Yes. Fine. Okay.
Yeah. So it looks like I can't resolve the host this way.
Just. Yeah. Just try reconnect. Just to mention that this SSH command would be typically wrapped in some simple script or so that the user actually doesn't need to see it.
Yeah, so I propose that perhaps you can make a screen movie of this and share it.
Yeah. No, well, now it seems like it's worked.
Do you still have an old one or not?
What?
Do you still have an old proxy there?
No, it doesn't matter. It got overwritten, probably.
Basically, the only thing we would see is that a proxy file would be saved there without any further interaction of the user.
Right, and then
something like
can
this,
just
basically.
Get proxy information out of that again, with the same roles that we asked for.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're going to change it for me, which is very useful. Yeah. Great. So Basically, this would have worked if we had network connectivity, but yes. So now I would like to. I hope it's not too technical, and I hope I have enough time. Otherwise, people could try and read it in the slides. Basically, this master portal, as we call it, is doing all the heavy lifting. And the reason we want to have, why we want to have this guy doing all the heavy lifting is because then this one can stay very simple. So basically, when the user goes in, he gets redirected to the master portal, which then redirects to the OAuth server. And if a certificate is needed, then initial myproxy put is done here, creates a CSR, and that is sent along to this delegation server to eventually be able to store the certificate there. So this one, the end entity certificate private key always stays only here. It will never get out, and no one can actually get to it. Once that's done, the user gets redirected back to the VO portal, and then the VO portal needs to have some form of token to actually retrieve, to do something here in the back channel. So as Niels fortunately pointed out to us, why don't you use something like OAuth 2? And indeed, this is basically an OAuth 2 flow. And since we are doing OpenID Connect here, we thought, well, maybe we can actually reuse some of the components. So basically, this is an even fuller slide, and you don't have to understand all the bits. But basically, here we have a client for the OpenID Connect on this side, while at the same time we have a servlet here, a server servlet here for the VO portal. And then the nice thing is that this master portal can hand out OAuth tokens to this VO portal, and then the VO portal can also use those same tokens, for example, to use them to do the put for the SSH key. So this is basically the entire flow as we hope it will be. It's not there yet, but it looks quite promising. We need a few small changes to this one compared to the other one, because we need to be able to send the VOMs FCANs along, because they will be used in this guy to actually produce the VOMs proxies, which will come back. And that's not currently in the protocol. Also, normally, from this flow, in this get cert, the CSR and the private key pair, the key pair, so the private key, are not made on server but on client side, and we don't want all those things here. So we do need to change something here or put another front end here, so that this VO portal does not have to do all the security stuff, but just get a proxy certificate back. And this is something which we still need to discuss a bit, because there are some security constraints, but not that many. So, some open issues. We need to further implement this master portal. I know that this is a pre-pilot and we shouldn't program too much. And that is actually also not really what we're doing. I mean, we're basically putting together, I mean, Tom is working hard and he might disagree with me, but basically we're putting together existing bits and pieces of software. Also, the API endpoint for uploading the SSH keys needs to be implemented, which would be basically standard OpenID. We need some small extensions to this profile. This profile is the one which actually describes this OpenID Connect flow. There will be a small adaptation which should be done by Jim Basney. And we actually have to do some fun stuff like building an online CA. For other pilots, it is indeed a good idea to look at Unity, because also Unity basically provides an online CA with OpenID Connect and SAML. The only problem I think which Unity has is that it's not easy to put in your own online CA, but I actually don't know because I haven't looked at the details yet, and that's definitely something which would be interesting. Something which would be very interesting is in integration with the DigiCert portal. The problem with the DigiCert portal is that it doesn't talk OpenID Connect, so that would be a completely different flow, but it could be still based on this master portal. So the master portal would be redirecting to the DigiCert portal instead of to the CR logon server. But this is obviously no longer CR logon. And then there's, I hope I actually I'm allowed to say this, but there are plans for an EGI pilot where this will be, at least parts of it, will be tested whether EGI can use this. And that will be, I think, still basically be the master portal as a token translation server between SAML and OpenID Connect to short-lived proxy certificates. So, in short, it's work in progress, but I think it looks very good. And I have some references for people who would like to know more.
Great, thank you. Questions?
No, actually, first of all, a clarification. I think this is two token translation services in one, right?
Yes, it is.
It's not one that does everything, but it's two in one.
Yeah. Basically, I mean, if you don't get a certificate out of this one, but just do the simple flow, then it basically translates SAML into OpenID Connect. And that was a discussion we had yesterday, that maybe we can actually reuse both of these guys, or just this guy, as a generic OpenID Connect server, and ignore the certificates with a slightly different flow.
And if you go to the next slide, which was the next one, I don't remember, the one that you actually focus on the master portal.
This one?
Yeah. There you have the one with the details. There you have the OpenID Connect server implementation and the translation possibly also to SAML. So you can do basically what Niels you were talking about before. So possibly you can just use the same thing just to connect OpenID Connect clients to SAML federations basically.
Technically, you're completely correct. There are, however, some other tools that are significantly simpler and easier, and can do this within one tool, basically. And in one, I would not want to put Roland up here, but to do this in like 100 lines of Python code, basically.
It's not so much that it's difficult or easy. The point is more that you have already a service which you will probably roll out, and then the question is it not useful to also build it in this tool which you basically already have? One thing with SAML to OpenID Connect is that you need to somehow encode the SAML attributes into claims which are a lot more flat than.
Okay, well, thank you. Great. Well, it's 1 o'clock now. But as the majority of you came in 15 minutes too late this morning, I think we can go on for 15 minutes. There's one short presentation by Niels.
So now wearing my other hat as the Géant SA5 Trust and Identity Services Development Technical Product Manager, blah, blah, blah. Oh, that's too many words for 4 seconds. Oh, shit, I already spent my time.
Go on.
No, in Géant project, we're working on a project called VO Platform as a Service, which aims at actually delivering, I will simply skip all this crap. Aims at delivering services that would aid virtual organizations. What we definitely do not want to do is to develop new stuff. We want to roll existing tools, proven stuff into deployments that can actually be used and actually can be sustained by a business case. So this project actually looks at technology on one side, but also very much looks at business case sustainability, even maybe payment models, that kind of stuff. We did a requirements gathering, as you should do, and we've looked at a lot of stuff. Started, well, as always, with the FIM4R paper, then sort of did a re-evaluation of whether whatever is in there is still valid. And we came up with something we've called the market analysis. We interviewed a number of collaborative organizations Some of the names may actually be very familiar to you guys here. And the other interesting thing is that we have actually got a very broad NREN Federation participation. I actually dare say that every person that matters within the collaboration space within the European NRENs is there. And actually some of the people are in this actual room already as well. The final draft report is over there. You can pick it up and read it. It's a final draft because the GÉANT project has a very interesting quote-unquote way of promoting their deliverables from final draft through a whole bunch of review procedures, and then you finally become a real deliverable. I will not bore you too much with that. This was sort of the core set of findings from the market analysis, and this is basically gives you an indication of how important or how many mentions various functional requirements had within the communities we questioned. So the ability for the VO to do their own attribute management was definitely and clearly number one. And of course, they need this for authorization. So I'm not really going to explain why they need it here. Guest identity, heavily discussed already here, is the number two. There's a number of other ones as well. Interestingly, and that was sort of a bit of an error on our side, which may be something of a learning moment for AARC here, is that, for example, well, it's not actually even there anymore. We thought that that to have a service catalog as a virtual organization would be a very useful thing. And we asked, and for example, Elixir said, no, we don't need that at all. And we were really like, how can this be? They're a very big pan-European organization, multiple services. Actually, it turned out that they already had one. However, we didn't ask. So getting your questions right is an important thing here. Based on these findings, we did some magic with the people, with hopefully knowledgeable people, and we did a workshop which actually translated the findings into functional requirements. And this is basically our first set of functional requirements that we want to address. And actually many of the things will be very familiar to the folks in this room, I guess. I'm not going to read them out loud, you can read yourselves. The slides will be provided. The next important thing for us was to define a deployment model for the services within the VO-PaaS platform. And actually we opted for two varieties. A set of basic services. They will be operated by GÉANT, or at least under the wings of GÉANT, let's call it that way. They will also be for VOs that are not legal entities, which is one of the biggest problems we currently have, I think. So that has some consequences for the actual operator, but we'll get into that a bit later. And we will operate them as a set of services in a multi-tenant fashion, basically. So typically, this would not be, assumably, not be for the Elixirs of this world, but for VOs in the longer tail, basically. So the next 5%, basically. We will then also run a number of advanced services. These will be operated by GÉANT, but they will be operated on behalf of the VO. In that scenario, somebody, a legal entity, must take responsibility for the data. But on the flip side, this allows the VO to actually have way more liberties in regard to what kind of data they want to store there and what kind of stuff they want to do there. So GÉANT is basically just operating as a technical operator and no longer as the actual owner of the data. And we plan on actually deploying this as per VO VMs. So basically a VO would get its own VM that would be managed by the GÉANT team. And it would be further, it's basically like sort of the IDP as a service scenario, to put it bluntly. What kind of functional requirements are we going to solve or to serve? The basic service will begin with two. The basic services, there will be two things. First of all, there will be a VO membership service. Basically, who are the people that are the members of my VO? To provide a service where you can actually register your own members. A challenge is that many of the VOs have very specific workflows for onboarding members, and they're all very different. We want to solve that problem by allowing VOs to define their own workflows for actually onboarding their members. And also help them with that by providing a number of templates for onboarding, because it is already clear that although there are many VOs with many scenarios, if you look at it at a slightly higher level, roughly said, there are about 5 to 10 scenarios really. So you can basically fit that in some templates. We will deal, it's a basic service, so we will only deal with a limited set of attributes, also to basically reduce the risk for the actual operator of the platform. And this service will become available through EduGain and through the XIDP. Now you're wondering, what's the XIDP? Well, that's actually the other service that we plan to run. The guest IDP problem has been discussed many times. And actually the guest IDP problem is sort of a combination of many problems, ranging from the fact that people don't have access to the guest IDP because the guest IDP is not linked up to the platform that they want to use. Some may not want to use social IDs. Some service providers may not want to do 20 integrations with all kinds of IDP products. So basically what we're planning to deliver is one single gateway, proxy, whatever you want to call that, to many guest IDPs, potential guest IDPs. And this is actually a reflection of the EID model, for example, in the Netherlands, where they basically say, you need to log in, please choose whatever IDP you like or you are comfortable with. We couldn't care less. We're planning actually to hook up a number of varieties there, social, NRAN operated, commercial. We want to do eGov, and we want to do bank IDs there. Until now, this is not really novel. The biggest novel thing is that you will have one place to go to as an VO, so that would be very helpful, I guess. But the other thing we want to do is we want to provide a level of assurance as part of the authentication, because actually a guest IDP is not really useful if you do not have any statement on the level of assurance. And even building on top of that, we want to allow the actual VO to provide its own level of assurance. So by default, we will use the EIDAS level of assurance framework. But if you, for some reason, have defined your own level of assurance, you think that, say, the the United ID IDP is a better one, which it actually is, by the way, then you can express that in your own level of assurance framework, and we can adopt that. And if your SP then asks for an authentication with the United IDP, we can provide that level of assurance as part of, of the authentication. We will make all the guest IDPs directly available through EduGain as well, which is also a new thing. So actually a service provider can point to normal IDPs, institutional IDPs, as well as some or all of these guest IDPs in one single wave. Functionally, what you can do in the advanced services is a lot. You can do advanced attribute management, advanced group management, provisioning and deprovisioning, and we also plan to have features for service proxying and attribute aggregation. All of these will become available through the EduGain and the XIDP. They must be managed by the VO operator, and actually they may be delivered as a paid service, so a VO may have to pay to actually use this service. Some of the tools we plan to use for the basic services, we're going to use co-manage for the VO membership service and a tool called Satusa, which has been developed by the team of Roland Hedberg, which is basically a SAML to anything proxy, but mostly anything must look like OAuth or OpenID Connect. For the advanced services, we plan on, we have selected a number of well-understood tools like co-manage, Hexa, and Perun, and we will use OpenConnect for the proxying bit. Little bit of planning, and that's my final slide for at least this bit, is that we are currently spinning up the pilot platform for this. Especially we're focusing first on the basic services. In the second part of next year, we will also start deploying pilots with the advanced services. And actually, I would be very interested to actually collaborate with this community, with AARC, project, and with communities inside of the AARC project to learn whether we're doing the right thing here, if we should tweak it or not, well, etc. So there's definitely, I think, a number of interesting possibilities for collaboration and pilots here. Another interesting thing maybe to note here is that the VO platform as a service activity has in its mandate the ability to pick up new stuff along the way. So one of the clear things that I see is that if we in AARC find out that service XYZ is actually extremely valuable we could actually work together with the VOPass platform to see if we can bring that into something like a production level service. So that would actually be an exit route for some of the AARC developments, basically. Okay. Any questions if time allows?
First of all, I would like to thank you very much for saying that most of us do not matter. That was a very interesting comment. Sorry? Thank you very much for saying that most of us do not matter. I mean, you saw a few organizations there. You said most of the organizations that matter are there. Thank you very much for that comment. But apart from that, I would like to ask, the solution you are building in Gen4, is it something that somebody can pick up and run it by themselves, or is it something that an entity will run and it's going to be provided as a service?
We haven't actually looked at the actual deployment of stuff. Our deployment model is definitely going to be service, because that's by definition what we're mandated to do. That said, it is clear for us as a technical team, basically, that we have to develop some of the deployment capabilities of the software stacks that we've just mentioned and improve them. So that could definitely, and we are imagining definitely that sort of flows back into the open source projects, so that would at least help deploy it for yourself.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because I just noticed that we already have two implementations. One is the CI logon and one is this one, that basically they target of a service that's being provided by another entity and it's going to be piloted within AARC as a possible solution for communities. Correct me if I am wrong here. So it is not just the technical tool that somebody can pick it up and have it working, but actually it's an offering, a solution from somebody. I don't know who is that somebody behind CI logon, but for the VO platform it's clearly Gen4, that makes a solution and makes it available for horizontal adoption.
Yeah. Correct.
I'm just making this also that it's clear that this is what's happening.
Yeah. Yes, we want to offer a service. Actually, the fact that there is software is interesting, but not so relevant there. Yeah.
Yeah. For the sustainability models to look just behind you. Meanwhile, since you're planning to operate it as an attribute authority service provider, are you aware, or maybe you're aware now, of the effort that EGI, Praise, Exceed put together in a guideline for how to operate attribute authority service providers in a way that relying parties could more readily trust? There's an IGTF document around that.
Sounds very interesting.
Yeah.
I was not aware.
You do have the link now.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. And
over there.
Dave Kelsey is the primary author and editor of the document. Yeah.
Thanks for that. That is probably very interesting. Yes.
Nils, if I can ask one thing quickly, if it's a quick answer, how do you handle guest IDPs? You said you will include guest IDPs, and I'm curious just to know the policy behind that. I mean, is it any concern about the LOE or how to handle them? Or?
So what is the problem?
No, the problem for me is, do you include guest IDPs in this platform, and then you sort of include them in Edugain directly? Because I mean, I don't know, how do you handle dealing with policies related to Edugain and the fact that those guest identities managed by someone? I mean, okay. I don't want. Well, just a curiosity, because
no, well, okay, yeah, that's a very good question. And the trick or the default route we're going to take here is Géant itself is operating out of Cambridge, their infrastructure. As such, they are members of the UK Access Federation, and the UK Access Federation would allow all these guest IDPs in their federation by default. That's their federation policy. So we can actually leverage that to get some of these guest/test IDPs in Edugain.
Okay, that's
actually it's already happened. I mean, Protect Network, for example, is an existing example of one of these, in this case, commercially operated guest IDPs.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, final question.
So it's about the technologies that you are evaluating for this. So there is a bunch of
heavy authorities. Yeah.
So several of them, like co-manage, etc., etc. So is that because you haven't chosen already what to use, or is just because you plan to put together several deployment to describe how to use Exa or Perun, for example, as attribute management behind it?
No, for the basic service we have chosen to do co-manage primarily because of its ability to really or fairly easily handle this very different workflows. But we also realized that for many of the advanced use cases, actually the limited set of attributes that we want to deal with within the basic service will never be enough. So we need to have some more advanced scenarios. Another thing, actually you didn't pick it up, which is good probably. For provisioning, for example, in the basic scenario, we're only going to support rather basic web-based SAML login scenarios. But we already know that many of the more advanced VO scenarios would need more intelligent provisioning and deprovisioning scenarios. And actually, what we're sort of going to do is we're going to say, if you have these more advanced needs, get your own box, get the support of, say, the Perun guys who've actually been dealing with this for ages already, or the Hexa folks or whatever. And basically, we sort of have now a channel where we will still provide, where we as Geant will still provide a service, but you can sort of get the services of the Perun folks to help you do the higher level integration and that kind of stuff.
So what you do is, you provide the service, meaning in Geant that you deploy an instance of Perun for that?
Yes, and operate that technically, yes, that's the idea, yeah. Fair enough. Sounds good.
Synergy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we really have to wrap up now. Are there a few words you would like to say about ORCID in 1 minute, or do we keep it for next time? Or
let's keep it for the next time.
Yeah.
If the next time does have enough time for pilots. What ORCID? Okay.
Yes, just words.
Just words. Oh, that should be easy.
Is that an advantage?
So does everybody know what ORCID is? Okay, everybody knows what ORCID is. Okay. ORCID has joined the SurfConnect Identity Federation in the Netherlands as a service provider. That contract is already there. That was quite a hassle. Took us 6 months of interesting talks between lawyers, basically. They are currently finalizing actually their service provider software into their production platform. They're currently at the QA level, which is, well, technically they're ready. It's just that they need to do the final, they need to do a little bit of GUIing here and there and stuff like that. But technically they're ready. They're also very capable in a technical sense. They can do this. They're doing this very well. Most important thing I think is that as part of the contract, especially if you're an European NREN or a European identity person, IDP, you must make sure that you do get consent from the end users. Because ORCID is not providing any other safeguards. Their data is in the US. They're a not-for-profit organization, so should there have been a safe harbor at all, they were never ever under safe harbor. They don't have any audits or trust framework, anything that we recognize in Europe. So the only thing we have is end-user consent. So that's a very, very important thing, I think. We're currently working with them to push them into EduGain. That will happen roughly in the first quarter of next year. But technically, they're already sort of ready, and they've asked me if they could do pilots with a small set of federations internationally in Europe to basically, well, dish out minor errors, hopefully, that we could run into. And I've asked the Italian guys over there somewhere to work with us, especially that was actually on request of ORCID, because they have already a consortium agreement with many of the Italian parties, so that helps from the licensing side basically. And well, not surprisingly, we're working with them from some of the Netherlands institutions. We're hoping to do that within the AARC project. Basically, it should be as simple as hooking up service providers to an IDP. That's my assumption, actually, that it is as simple. And then they should be able to do EduGain by first quarter of next year, basically. Yes.
Good. Well, then my final slide. So now we get to the planning of the pilot he would like to do. So if you look at the slide at the left-hand side, we have the pre-pilot work. That's how I would like to label it. We have done so far. We have taken some components, have a look at it, and get some experience with it. But, well, I think in the first quarter of 2016, we really have to start commencing doing the pilots with the communities. And we thought it would be a good idea to, well, start with 3-month slots in which we do a cycle of a pilot, and that could be 3 or 4 or maybe 5 at the same time in parallel, where we have a look at certain components. So while we were waiting for the real blueprint architecture, the focus will be mainly on components, but gradually we will move into the integration of the different components and test those setups with the communities as well. So what we are trying to do now in the SA1 activity is to fill in the kind of activities and pilots we would like to do when. And well, maybe you can offline have a closer look and put your ideas in there as well. And for example, well, this with CI logon we have started already. There could be an extension with attributes. Well, maybe this one should be one box up there. Later on, we can maybe do something with CI logon 2 version, which integrates with co-manage. And in the end, over here, we should test with the community how these components integrate and whether these communities can access each other's shared resources and do that with their institutional accounts. So that's how we plan to do that. Well, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you. Are there any more questions about the pilots? I also had one picture of Stephen almost sleeping during the session, but I didn't dare to put it on the screen.
Okay, as I'm standing between you and lunch and your other plans for the afternoon, it's sunny outside, so I will keep it very short. I would like to thank you, Andrea, and all the team in Milan here for the great hospitality. This is bad. This is very bad because then we want to come back. So this is, you open a precedent now. We are definitely coming back. So I would like to say just a few personal considerations about this meeting. I think it was very good. It seems like even 2.5 days, well, 2 days is too short. So we'll have to think a little bit, maybe better what to do at the next meeting. What I think, what I would have liked to see a bit more was really an opportunities for people to do some hands-on work that is really getting, like this together to look at the screen, complaining about documents or documentation and, do this type of work, which I think it's the only time you can do it together when you are face-to-face. It doesn't work very well via video conference. So having really a board, write stuff, the old-fashioned ways. So maybe we should think a little bit more with the work package leaders, task leaders, how to enable for that. Concerning the presence, the remote participants, I think, as much as we want to be inclusive, but effectively that kills the conversation, the microphones, the things, you know. So I think also this we should really look a little bit better. Maybe we could have some more open discussions and have a slot at the end, say 1 hour, 1.5 hours, where we do a little wrap up with remote people, and then could be a bit easier also to follow and to focus. I think, and this is, I mean, for Jens and also for the next, unless there is a strike, fog, or, you know, sickness, etc., those that want to present and want to get feedback on the presentation really should be in person, because I mean, the experience has not been very successful. There could be better cases in the future, but I think we should really maximize the face-to-face meeting for this type of things. I mean, this said, I think it was a very good meeting. We had lots of discussion. I think we have 20 pages on minutes. Good Lord. So lots of things to process. I will try to, I don't know what to do for the minutes. Of course, I think, you know, I don't want to force everybody to read 20 pages on minutes. I think we should probably write a blog post, distill the highlights and the actions, and then maybe put the rest offline for everybody to look at that and, you know, pick up what is additional that you want to do. So, thank you so much, everybody, for your time, your input, your collaboration. Yes, everything to Sigita. Thank you to Sigita for taking care of all different requirements from everybody. So, and have a good rest of the day. And lunch. Lunch. The guys there for the streaming. Thank you.